Hey guys, picture this. You're squatting in a foul-smelling chamber pot, the walls closing in with every mosquito buzzing overhead, and just when you think you might finally get some relief, surprise! The neighbor bursts in complaining you borrowed his goat again. Sounds charming, right? Welcome to medieval romance starring infections, cramped hovels, and a spice rack that's just a fancy name for smelly herbs you hope keep you alive. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. 20 seconds into your medieval love life, and you already owe your local apothecary enough coin to buy a small village. Why? Because sex wasn't the blissful candlelit rendezvous you see on TV. It was more like an audition for who can survive syphilis the longest. Imagine trading romantic kisses in a field of daisies. Only the daisies are actually cow patties, the kisses come with a side of lice, and romance means not dying of septicemia by dawn. Segment 1. The prehistoric pheromones of medieval times. So you find yourself in a drafty stone keep, clutching a crude wooden bucket because it's too far to trudge to the latrine. Your medieval counterpart isn't serenading you with sonnets. They're fanning you with a wilted cabbage leaf, trying to hide that they haven't bathed in months, or ever, depending on their personal hygiene philosophy. Let's talk about pheromones. Back then, your natural scent was something like eau de donkey stew, and people wore layers upon layers of clothing stuffed with dried flowers to mask it. They called them posies, which sounds delightful until you remember those flowers were sometimes the only thing keeping flesh-eating bacteria at bay. But hey, nothing says I love you like the lingering aroma of herb-stuffed undergarments. Don't get me wrong, proximity was key. Nobles stuffed themselves into velvet jackets despite the heat, hoping their sweet perfumes, red rose water and questionable oils, would turn a sweaty duke into an amorous poet instead of a delirious corpse. For peasants, the dream was simple. Finding someone whose body odor didn't make you gag every time they stepped or staggered into your hovel. Low-maintenance romance, 14th century style. Segment 2. Courtship, or how to not get beheaded. In a world without OkCupid, courtship was conducted by sending love tokens, inevitably covered in more germs than a plague-ridden rat. Knights would present ladies with gloves, ladies would respond with a fainting spell, and a prayer that the glove wearer didn't have leprosy. Etiquette demanded that you never ever touch your partner before marriage, unless you counted poking them with a ceremonial rose thorn during an awkward handshake. Family reputation was everything, so marriages were more business merger than meet cute. You might spend your entire youth pining for the local blacksmith's daughter, only to be married off to the duke's spinster sister, who was rumored to be mildly insane and had a pet raven that bit. Romantic communication basically involved shouting from opposite balconies or sending pigeons, which often arrived decapitated. If you managed to get a private meeting, beware the infamous medieval blind date. The bed was a communal affair, shared by siblings, servants, and the occasional stray chicken. Privacy was a myth, and if you did get a moment alone, congratulations. You now had to perform basic biology, without the benefit of contraception, prenatal care, or the faintest clue what the human reproductive system looked like. Segment 3. The bedroom or mudroom. Once you finally consummated the relationship, or at least tried to, the bedroom offered all the comforts you'd expect: stale air, bed bugs, and a thin wool blanket pocked with mysterious stains. The mattress was a tick-filled sack of straw. The sheets were an optional extra, depending on how rich you were. Condoms? That'd be a leather sheath soaked in animal fat, but good luck finding one that fit. Birth control consisted of herbal potions purported to stave off pregnancy, like pennyroyal or willow bark, both lovingly nicknamed drink and hope. Many a maiden sipped these brews, prayed to her patron saint, and crossed her fingers, resulting in either a surprise baby or spontaneous organ failure. That's right, medieval medicine didn't really distinguish between an herbal abortifacient and a lethal poison. Kinda makes you appreciate modern science. And let's not forget the pièce de résistance, postpartum care. After childbirth, women were confined to a lying-in chamber, left to recover in isolation with charcoal smoke swirling overhead to disinfect the air. New mothers got maybe a week of rest before being shoved back into daily chores, just in time to conceive again. One and done wasn't a term in the medieval love lexicon. 10 kids by age 30 was more the norm. Segment 4. Sexually transmitted diseases. Medieval roulette. Ever heard of gonorrhea? Syphilis? Neither had medieval peasants, but they had something even worse, called pox, which turned its victims into walking horrors, courtesy of bacteria that relished eating flesh. Symptoms included oozing sores, hair loss, and random nosebleeds, plus a steady decline into mental chaos. Treatment involved applying mercury ointment, because nothing says we care like a toxic heavy metal. Many patients died from mercury poisoning before the pox got them. And hygiene? Don't make me laugh. Medieval bathing schedules ranged from once a decade to only when the church called it a sin. Frequent dips in rivers could spread waterborne diseases, so most folks avoided them, choosing instead to bathe in filth and call it character building. Want to know why people believed sex was sinful? They simply didn't want to admit they enjoyed the one pleasurable act in existence when everything else sucked. Segment 5. Lack of knowledge. Ignorance as the ultimate aphrodisiac anatomy books were rare, and dissection was considered sacrilegious. Priests preached that sex was only for procreation, so any pleasure you derived was probably the devil's work. Medical texts suggested tying a live toad around a man's testicles to cure impotence, because apparently gargling toad juices wasn't absurd enough. Contraception myths abounded, women dunking themselves in fermented wine, men wearing magical goatskin condoms, midwives inserting crocodile dung pessaries, yes, actual dried crocodile bits, into the vaginal canal. If you survived that experiment, you'd be lucky. Most didn't, and the lucky ones still risked ritual humiliation. The infamous pillow test, where a woman had to prove her virginity by tearing a pillow in front of villagers. Talk about performance anxiety. Segment 6. Pleasure, if you're lucky. Despite the hardships, medieval folks did find moments of passion. They improvised positions using hay bales in stables, sang lewd folk songs at festivals, and discovered that merriment and ale could lower inhibitions, though not by much if you had to hide in a barn while the Lord's soldiers searched for unregistered merrymakers. Noble weddings featured elaborate lovemaking simulators, huge carved wooden beds draped in silks, designed to showcase the couple's virility. Guests would gather outside the chamber door, listening for triumphant thuds and moans, interpreting them as signs of a successful union. Mortifying? Totally. But hey, that's celebrity gossip for the Middle Ages. Segment 7. Conclusions on surviving medieval sex. So would you survive medieval sex? Probably not. Between the lice, the syphilis, the unpredictable ambient smells, and the utter lack of privacy or medical knowledge, it was less of a romantic adventure and more of a hazardous expedition. The takeaway? Modern love is practically a spa retreat compared to this nightmare on Earth. And if you ever find yourself complaining about awkward Tinder dates or overpriced hotel rooms, just remember, at least you can shower, wear deodorant, and call an ambulance in an emergency. Medieval lovers only had hope, prayer, and a withered cabbage leaf. That wraps up the first chapter of our saga. More absurdities, infections, and daredevil courtships await in part 2. Stick around, because the horror show has only just begun. The stench of yesterday's ale still clings to your tunic as you shuffle into the village square, clutching last night's regrets like a drunken talisman. You thought the brothel at the edge of town might offer a modicum of pleasure? The best laid plans of a medieval horny peasant, but instead you found yourself elbow deep in a trough of half-frozen sewage, courtesy of the local offers, 2 rusty nails and a prayer. Prostitution was the only safe outlet for many, licensed by the church in some cities to keep the more ruffianly sorts from pillaging convents. The madam greets you with a leer that freezes your blood. She's seen one too many flaccid fortunes squandered on liquored-up farmers. Coins drop into her clawed palm as you're led through a curtain stained with what you hope isn't rot. Inside, the walls pulse with the murmur of body heat and the clatter of wooden beds. Curtains flap, revealing forms pressed together like crowded grain sacks. The ladies here, once maidens with dreams of chivalric romance, now offer mechanical services for a handful of pennies. You lie atop a lumpy straw mattress, the only padding a rat nest squashed flat. The woman beside you exhales clouds of tobacco smoke, introduced by returning crusaders. mixed with the sour tang of unwashed linen. She offers a flourish of cosmetics made from crushed beetles and lead pigment to hide the blue circles under her eyes. If you survive the act, you'll leave with a limp spine and a promise of syphilis in your youth. As your bones creak back to life outside, you notice the madam fumbling with a tin box. She retrieves a vial labeled Venom Cure in shaky script, a concoction of mercury, honey, and crushed snake scales. She assures you it prevents the dreaded clap, but at a price so dear it makes your marrow quiver. Should you gulp its fiery filth, you might avoid discharge, so green it glows in moonlight, but you'll risk going homicidally mad within a fortnight. Many a desperate soul preferred the slow burn of a pox sore to the instantaneous agony of the cure. You tuck the vial into your tunic, where it rattles like a death knell. Returning home, you find your wife, a hard-faced woman with calloused hands, waiting by the hearth. She's prized more for her sturdiness than her charms, a practical survival choice. You each undress in silence, the chill of the stone floor biting through your bones. No romantic whispers or flourishing embraces. She merely adjusts her shift and turns her back, as if your shared chores could anesthetize the gulf between necessity and desire. Despite 12 years of marriage and 8 children, 2 of whom didn't survive infancy, she still flinches at your touch. You hope you can coax her body into something resembling warmth, but the ache you feel inside is colder than the drafty corridor beyond the door. That night, beneath a single candle sputtering against the gloom, you attempt the ritual of intimacy. There's a choreography so familiar it's become rote. She positions the straw sack at a jaunty angle. You align your aching flesh, wincing at every splintering movement. A gulp of spiced mead dulls the sharp edge of fear. Fear of pain, of disease, of children you can't feed. The walls seem to close in as you press into her, bit by bit, like a stake driven home by duty rather than desire. She grits her teeth, sighing only to stifle the groan, and you hold still, halfway between triumph and torment. Moments later it's over, both bodies spent, dripping sweat and regret into the bedding. In the gray dawn, she whispers of another pregnancy, half fearful, half resigned. You can barely summon comfort. Life is already a struggle against famine, taxation, and marauding bands of soldiers who demand your coin or your home. A new mouth means another belly to fill with gruel, another pair of lungs choking on winter frost. Nor do you dare mention her mother's tales of childbirth, how a single cough during labor could snap your spine, or how midwives coaxed infants from wombs with hooks if the pain grew too protracted. She looks away, eyes glassy, lips pressed. In medieval times, a woman might lie bleeding for days before succumbing to infection. You're both too exhausted to pray. Meanwhile, the local priest delivers sermons on purity and chastity, oblivious to the ragged lines forming at the leeching schools. He preaches that sexual sin rots the soul, yet condemns those ravaged by the pox as living corpses. The sick are draped in black cloth and paraded through alleyways, so townsfolk can spit curses at them without risking priestly wrath. You glimpse these wretches stumbling past your door, their faces hidden beneath hoods, lance-shaped lesions oozing onto the dirt. Their only solace is a rat-bitten loaf of stale bread and a blessing whispered by a renegade friar. You swallow hard, wondering if the rumor that lepers can spit venom through their lips holds any truth. In winter, when the hearth fire flickers low, you and your wife huddle beneath ratty furs. The cold seeps into your bones, making every nerve feel as exposed as your heart was on your wedding night. Sex becomes a hurried necessity, a primal bid for warmth rather than a quest for connection. You wrap your arms around her, trying to summon any spark of desire, but the chill remains. Outside, wolves howl at the moon, and you envy their savage freedom. At least they hunt and feast, you only fight for scraps. The notion of passionate embrace feels like a lie propagated by poets who've never known the terror of hypothermia. By spring, the village green bursts with life. So-called fertility festivals, where villagers dance around phallic maypoles, chanting prayers to pagan deities for abundant crops and healthy babes. You join the procession, mask of merriment in place, but inside you ache with dread. Too many festivals meant too many weddings meant too many babies, and too many babies meant the entire hamlet teetering on the brink of starvation. A drunken reveler hands you a cup of lamb's blood mulled with honey. He claims it boosts virility. You drain it in one go, only to vomit crimson on the grass beside the church steps. The priest smacks your backside with a knotted branch, issuing a blessing that tastes like wood devilry. Later that night, emboldened by ale, you slip into the arms of a traveling troubadour's wife in a barn loft. She's exotic in your dull world. She speaks of distant courts, perfumes distilled from oranges, silken linens that don't itch. Her fingers trace lands unknown upon your skin, awakening sensations you thought dead. But as you cling to this fleeting vision of opulence, dawn breaks, and with it comes the bailiff's dogs, sniffing out illicit pleasures. You flee through hay bales, heart pounding like a war drum, leaving the troubadour's wife weeping in the straw. In the cold light of morning, her tears freeze on her cheeks like shards of glass. Treachery lurks in every corner. A jealous neighbor might accuse you of defiling his daughter, prompting a public trial where formal evidence is a coin placed in the bailiff's palm. Punishments for fornication include whippings, public shaming, or worse, banishment. Should you be a noble, the accusation might be hushed, the money exchanged, the scandal silenced with a shrug and a pocketful of groats. If you're a peasant, however, you risk being paraded through the streets, a dunce's cap atop your head, while villagers pelt you with rotten vegetables. Any spark of medieval romance extinguished by the rancid smell of decay hurled from cart and cart. As dusk settles, you trudge home through the mire, each step a testament to survival against all odds. You open the door to find your eldest daughter kneeling by her cradle, humming a lullaby you taught her. The infant, wrapped in a scrap of linen, gurgles and reaches out a chubby fist. For a moment, you glimpse the miracle of life untouched by the harshness outside. But then the midwife's words echo in your head. 1 in 3 children slip back to the earth before their first breath. You force a smile, tuck your coat tighter, and lie down beside your wife, her breath warm against your shoulder. In the flickering candlelight, you find a fragile tenderness between you, the memory of gentler times before illness, before warlords, before taxes became weightier than your own bones. You let your mind drift to a future you've no right to imagine. A time when laughter outlasts sorrow, when a kiss is just a kiss and not a gamble with death. But as you close your eyes, the strains of a distant fiddle haunt your dreams, its melody a reminder that medieval sex was never about love. It was about survival. And in that cold, shadowed world, survival felt anything but romantic. You wake to the dull ache behind your eyes long before dawn's dim glow reaches your window slit. Today is market day, which means the whole village will crowd into the muddy square, swapping gossip and livestock, and, if you fancy your luck, a bit of illicit flirtation behind the barley stalls. But before you can even hope for a stolen glance or a furtive caress, you're roped into hauling heavy barrels of ale for the local tavern. Your back screams protest, and by the time you finally free yourself, the sun is halfway up the sky. Market stalls burst alive, baskets of turnips, slabs of salted pork, and bolts of rough spun cloth that itch worse than poison ivy. You spy a fresh-faced farm girl selling beeswax candles. She offers you a shy smile as you pass. You consider buying one just to have an excuse to touch her fingers. But you're a married man, the tavern master reminds you, puffing his chest as if you'd forgotten your dozen offspring. And besides, her father's a hard man with an even harder stick. Discouraged, you settle instead for a mug of sour ale, perfect for dulling the pangs of attraction. You recall tales of a traveling healer who promises to rekindle passion in barren marriages. For a fee, she'll administer a draft brewed from rare saffron and powdered pearls, ingredients that sound made up until you see the coin she demands. Rumor has it those pearls are pilfered from pilgrims at the port, ground underfoot by barefoot novices. You debate whether a cup of mystical goo that smells like rotten oysters is worth the price of a week's wages. Then again, the look in your wife's eyes these days could use some rekindling, or at least a good jolt. By midday, you've sold your surplus hens and held more flirtatious banter with the tavern wench than with your own spouse in months. You're halfway to arranging a clandestine meeting in the hayloft when the captain of the guard strides into the square, face as rigid as a stolen armored breastplate. He bellows that the local lord requires fresh recruits for his latest campaign. Any able-bodied man must swear fealty and march by week's end. Suddenly, thoughts of sensual indulgence evaporate. War is the harshest aphrodisiac, promising muddy trenches and death before dawn. You promise yourself you'll return for that tavern wench, if you survive. Evening finds you drafting a hastily scrawled letter to your wife. I will return soon, think of me fondly. You seal it with wax, though you know messages often vanish in the corrupt mail system or end up in the wrong hands. Love letters in medieval times carry their own risks. A jealous neighbor could intercept your words and twist them into proof of adultery. You imagine your wife reading your note, her heart fluttering, only to have the militia barge in, accusing her of harboring a traitor. You stifle the thought and tuck the missive away. That night, as the moon drapes the keep in silver gloom, you sneak into the tavern's back room. The wench is waiting, cheeks flushed from too many hours bent over ale buckets. She presses a sooty finger to your lips, warning you to keep your voice down. You lean in, hoping for something more than the usual quick tryst, perhaps a moment of genuine warmth amid the tumult. Instead, she pulls you into the corner, their backless bodice scraping your forearm. The lamplight reveals the hollow beneath her eyes, where joy has long since been traded for hard coin. Her movements are practiced, each thrust measured for maximum efficiency. You press into her, half awake, half starved for affection. Outside, laughter and lute music seep through the thin walls, a cruel reminder of revelers celebrating fertility with abandon. You step too eagerly, and the worn floorboards betray you with a creak. The wench freezes, her face paling. "Get out," she hisses, fumbling with your belt. "If anyone finds us." Her words trail into a sob before she shoves you into the street, her skirt swirling like a storm. Your breath comes in ragged bursts as you stumble through the alley. Every shadow seems alive, ready to snatch you and drag your sorry body to the stocks. You pause, wiping sweat from your brow, and realize the cost of desire. Fear, humiliation, and the certainty that you'll return tonight exactly as you left. Alone, desperate, and wishing for something you can't really remember anymore. Back at home, your wife sits by the dying hearth, stitching a patch into your eldest son's tunic. She doesn't look up as you enter. Silence stretches between you like a chasm. You realize neither of you has the energy for accusations or confessions. Instead, you collapse onto a bench and pry off your boots, each layer of wool and leather a testimony to the miles you've trudged in search of fleeting pleasures. Moonlight slants through the window, illuminating dust motes that dance like spirits. Your wife finally speaks. "Another letter?" she asks, nodding toward your cloak. You fish out the note, unfolding it with trembling fingers. Her eyes scan the words. "I miss you. I will return." And for an instant, her lips quiver. Then she folds the paper with surprising firmness and tucks it into her bodice. "Pray God you do," she whispers, voice rough with exhaustion. You reach for her hand, but she draws it back, tracing a line on the wooden table instead. "Don't promise me what you cannot keep," she says. "I've listened to too many men vow the moon." The candle gutters casting shifting shadows across her face. You feel an overwhelming urge to bridge the gap, to chase away her skepticism with tenderness. But all you manage is a soft groan as the weight of your own fatigue presses you under. Night deepens into silence, punctuated only by the faint cries of wolves prowling the outskirts. You imagine them loping across the moor, free from human folly, bloodlust their only passion. A bitter envy wells inside you. At least they know their instincts. You close your eyes, but sleep eludes you. Instead, your mind drifts to future harvests, future children, and future lovers, whose hands you might one day hold without fear of reprisal. But hope is a fragile thing in medieval times, prone to shattering under the weight of a single frost. Before dawn, you rise and slip outside, the cold air searing your lungs. You find your neighbor Marjorie waiting by the river with a pail. She hesitates when she sees you, clutching the pail as though it were a weapon. Word spreads fast in this village, faster than any pigeon or priest's sermon. She tips the pail's icy water over her coarse shift, shuddering as the chill cuts through her bones. You stand by in awkward silence, neither of you daring to speak of last night. The river's current gurgles a lullaby of cruel indifference. Marjorie finally breaks the quiet. "If you're leaving for the army, may God have mercy on you." Her voice cracks, revealing more than words ever could. You nod, unable to find solace in prayers you barely believe. You both turn away, each to your own tasks. Hers, to fetch water for a household she's never chosen. Yours, to prepare for a campaign you're too weary to face. Later, the Lord's trumpets blare, summoning all able men to the courtyard. Armor clangs, horses whinny, and the air vibrates with the promise of bloodshed. You mount a weary steed, its flanks slick with sweat. As you ride past your wife and children, their faces blur into a mottled tapestry of fear and hope. You offer a half wave, the motion stiff as a board. Your son salutes back, eyes bright with admiration. You swallow hard, rectifying your posture. One day, you tell yourself, one day you'll return and know what it means to love without the dread of tomorrow. But as you gallop toward the horizon, the wind whipping through your hair, you realize the bitter truth. In medieval times, sex, love, and war are inseparable. Each promise of pleasure carries with it the specter of loss. Every embrace hides the threat of a spear. And survival, oh survival, is the greatest seduction of all. You wake to the clang of the village bell summoning everyone for the annual tax collection. Outside, the bailiff's ledger lies open on a rough bench, its pages stained with ink and tears. You inch forward, clutching your meager coin purse, knowing that the gold you carry barely scratches the surface of what you owe. Beside you, other villagers shuffle in weary resignation, each of them one coin short, yet none daring to speak of it. Your wife stands apart, clutching your eldest daughter's hand as the bailiff's gauntleted finger points your way. You step forward, offering all you have, a handful of tarnished pennies, a copper button, and a promise to pay the rest come harvest. The bailiff scoffs, snapping the button between his fingers before tossing it back. Next time, bring more, he growls. The crowd parts like a sick wave, and you retreat with hollow pockets but a heavier heart. With taxes paid, or at least postponed, you trudge back through the muddy lanes toward your stone cottage. Every step presses grime into your worn boots. Each breath carries the stench of smoke and manure. You wonder if matters could worsen, if any more cruelty could be added to this medieval tapestry of misery. Yet, as you reach your door, you see her. A traveling peddler's cart parked by the wayward elm, its battered barrels promising exotic wares. Inside the cart, crates of foreign silks, jars of amber honey, and flasks of fragrant rose oil catch the dying light. The peddler, a wiry man with a hawk's nose, beckons you closer. Something for the tired husband? A balm to soothe aching joints? Or perhaps, he leans in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a tonic to ignite passion in even the coldest of marriages? He reveals a small vial filled with shimmering liquid, so precious that he names it elixir of ardor. You recall the countless cures you've tried, pennyroyal tea, crocus root tinctures, toad-eye eye drops, all failures or worse. Yet your wife, in her quiet desperation, once pried a vial from your cloak, spilling its contents and chasing you with curses that echoed through the rafters. You swallow your pride and ask the peddler the price. His eyes gleam. A day's labor, 3 hens, or a birthright favor. You haggle until the peddler grunts in defeat, settling on 2 hens and a promise. That night, under a sky smeared with stars, you present the elixir of ardor to your wife. She regards the vial with suspicion, her brow furrowed beneath her kerchief. Yet exhaustion and desperation win out. She tips the liquid to her lips, the taste like honey laced with dragon's breath. You watch her, heartbeat pounding against your ribs, willing the potion to work. Moments later, she stirs, color blooming in her cheeks for the first time in months. She turns to you, eyes bright, and for an instant, the walls of your cottage shimmer with possibility. You draw her close, breath mingling as you lean in, only to be jolted away by a gut-wrenching cramp that seizes her side. She cries out, collapsing to the floor in agony. Panicked, you rush for water, splashing her face as she writhes on the cold stones. The lights of pleasure vanish, replaced by flashes of pain. You pound on the door for the midwife, but the village healer has fled to tend to plague victims elsewhere. Left alone, you cradle your wife, praying her screams don't draw villagers armed with torches and pitchforks. By dawn, she lies still. You dare not examine her face. You fear it might be glazed with the specter of death. You stagger outside, heart hammering, and find the peddler already gone. No trace of his cart or wares. 2 hens peck listlessly at the earth, and the vial has vanished from the table as if it were never there. You return to your cottage, shaken. To your relief, your wife breathes, shallow and ragged. She opens her eyes, focusing on yours, with a look that blends contempt and fear. "Never again," she whispers, voice raw. You nod, tears springing unbidden, grateful she survived yet haunted by the risk you took. Weeks pass and the wound festers, a painful reminder of the price you paid for forbidden passion. Every night your wife shifts uneasily, wincing as her side throbs, the memory of the potion's calamity etched into flesh and mind. The rats in the rafters gnaw at wooden beams, their teeth echoing your guilt. Despite her condition, the seasons churn on. As autumn's chill sets in, you're drafted again, this time for king's levies bound for foreign shores. You kneel before your wife and children, pressing what little coin remains into their hands. Your eldest son stares up at you, eyes hollow but resolute. Your daughter clings to your cloak, sniffing back tears. You press a kiss to your wife's forehead, feeling her tremor beneath your lips. You mount your horse, adjusted by a squire who eyes you with naked disdain. The saddle pinches your ribs, and the horse's flanks are slick with sweat. You glance back to catch one last glimpse of your home, smoke curling from the chimney, your wife's silhouette in the doorway, children huddled behind her skirts. You blink and she vanishes into the dusk. The road to war is lined with corpses, fallen soldiers left by the wayside, their lifeblood soaking into the mud. Under the banner of a warlord who's never set foot outside his keep, you march toward a destiny neither glorious nor noble. Nights are spent in soggy encampments where lice feast and the promise of battle looms like a specter. Whispers spread of enemy tactics, pits filled with spikes, flaming arrows dipped in poison, women and children slaughtered to break morale. On the eve of battle, you stand among ranks of trembling men, hearts pounding like war drums. Across the field, the enemy's standards snap in the wind, a silent promise of death. You grip your spear, recalling your wife's whispered vow, never again. The hatred and longing swirl within you, inseparable now from the fear that binds your chest. Dawn breaks, and the charge begins. You surge forward, a wave of steel and screams, the world narrowing to the heft of your weapon and the rhythm of your breath. You strike at armored foes, the clash of metal ringing in your ears. A spear snaps underfoot, and you tumble into a ditch filled with the bodies of comrades. Their eyes stare into nothingness as you scramble free, pain exploding in your leg. You crawl to the battlefield's edge, blood staining the grass. A sword-wielding knight looms, sun glinting off his helm. You brace for the final blow, but before he can strike, an arrow whistles past, plunging into his throat. He staggers, eyes bulging, and collapses atop you. You lie pinned beneath his bulk, gasping for air. As the world dims, you see flickers of your wife's face. Her fear, her anger, her silence. You remember the night spent in the straw, the cold mouth of survival, the fleeting joy of a passionate embrace before agony struck. You wonder if, in death, you'll find the peace that eluded you in life. Your heartbeat slows, each pulse a fading echo of the life you led. The stink of blood and sweat fills your nostrils. You feel warm hands lifting you. A medic's voice murmurs through the haze. But hope is as fragile as medieval silk, and you wonder if your final breaths will find you in pain or relief. Somewhere a bell tolls, marking the death of another soul. Perhaps tomorrow, the bishop will preach of martyrdom, of the glory in battle, the virtue of sacrifice. He will not speak of the midnight escapades in barns or the whispered promises shattered by greed and ignorance. He will not know of the elixir of ardor or the peddler's betrayal. In your last flicker of consciousness, you see your wife's stern face, illuminated by a candle in your home that you will never return to. She stands at the threshold of life and death, her prayer a silent plea that you survive this war. But as the darkness closes in, you realize that medieval sex and medieval war are twin horrors, each promising transcendence, delivering only suffering. And so, you exhale once, twice, and let the night claim you, a final act of surrender in a world where survival was the cruelest seduction of all. Hey guys, picture this. You're in a dank medieval hovel, clutching a damp bit of wool soaked in vinegar and praying it keeps you from unplanned parenthood. Because if it doesn't, you're signing up for a lifetime of poverty, plague, and possibly rats, as roommates. Now, grab your medieval calendars and prepare to be horrified, because today we're diving headfirst into the absurd, brutal, and downright disgusting world of birth control in the Middle Ages. Let's face it, contraception as we know it was about as rare as a sanitized barber or a gentle flogging. Medieval men and women had to rely on a grab bag of folk remedies, magical charms, and medical wisdom that ranged from mildly hilarious to outright lethal. Buckle up, because here are the first wave of methods that will shock you and possibly prompt you to stock up on modern pharmacy essentials. 1. Crocodile dung pessaries. Yes, you read that right. Somewhere between a pious monk's sermon and the local butcher's whetstone, someone decided that inserting a pessary made of dried crocodile dung into a woman's womb would block conception. The logic was questionable, but crocodiles were exotic creatures, and exotic often meant powerful. Detailed instructions survive in medieval texts. Grind the dung into a powder, mix with honey and olive oil to achieve a paste-like consistency, fashion it into a torpedo shape, and slide it in before intercourse. The result? A pungent vaginal swamp that repelled not only sperm, but possibly the woman herself. Side effects allegedly included infection, chemical burns, and the faint hope you weren't injecting tetanus. Dusra, the honeyed spermicide. In more rational corners of medieval Europe, honey was the go-to remedy for everything from plague sores to broken hearts. So naturally, honey also became a primitive spermicide. Couples were instructed to take a small spoonful of honey, mix it with powdered pomegranate rind or crushed mint leaves, and apply it inside the vagina after sex. The theory was that honey's stickiness would trap sperm, and its natural acidity might kill them. The reality? Honey ferments, attracts bacteria, and basically sets up your nether regions for a yeast infection more epic than the Black Death. Moondrom, sea sponges with vinegar. If you lived near the coast or could afford a merchant shipment, sea sponges offered a slightly less toxic barrier method. You dunk a sponge in wine vinegar or strong brine, squeeze out the excess liquid, but not all of it, and insert it deep. The acidity was supposed to kill sperm. The sponge itself would physically block them. The catch: sponges nursed on vinegar slowly rotted, smelled faintly of fish guts, and required delicate removal lest you leave one behind as a sort of medieval time bomb. Women who used this method risked devastating infections, abscesses, and the sheer terror of a sponge you couldn't find when bedtime rolled around. 4. Vinegar-soaked wool. Wool was everywhere in medieval life. Blankets, clothing, even diapers. In some villages, midwives touted vinegar-soaked wool as a makeshift condom for the woman. You'd wrap a small tuft of lamb's wool around your finger, douse it in strong vinegar, and insert it post-coitus. The acidity supposedly incapacitated sperm, while the wool created a crude barrier. But wool isn't waterproof, and vinegar irritates delicate tissue, so what you got was a scratchy, stinging nightmare that probably accomplished nothing besides creating medieval hemorrhoids. Eindavde, pomegranate rinds and rue tea. Herbalists swore by rue, Ruta graveolens, as the ultimate female contraceptive. Women boiled rue leaves into a tea, drank it, or used the decoction as a vaginal wash. Pomegranate rinds, rich in tannins, also made the cut. Dried and powdered, they were mixed into wine or wine vinegar. The combination of rue's alleged emmenagogue properties and pomegranate's acidity was supposed to prevent implantation. Side effects: abdominal cramps, erratic menstruation, potential miscarriage, and the risk of complete organ failure if you misjudged your dosage. Araude, coitus interruptus in prayers. The simplest method was the old pull-out trick, and it came with a spiritual advisor. Couples who could afford a private confession might confess their lustful thoughts, receive instructions and a stern warning from a priest, then leave the chapel clutching rosaries and intending to withdraw at exactly the right second. No guarantees, of course. Timing an orgasm requires more precision than a siege engineer, and the church officially frowned on any act that impeded procreation. Penitents were often told that relying solely on withdrawal was tantamount to tempting God, so they added prayers, novenas, and sacramental oils to their contraceptive regimen. Erant, amulets, charms, and fetishes. Magic filled the gaps where medicine failed. Women hung hazelnut amulets from their belts, wore knot charms carved from elder wood, or carried pebbles inscribed with protective runes. In parts of England, a midwife might sew a small bag of dried mugwort into a woman's shift, believing it would ward off conception. Other folk cures included drinking the water used to wash a seal's skin. wearing smelly fish scales, or burying a rooster heart under the hearth. These methods were pure superstition, but they offered desperate couples some placebo control over the size of their brood. 8. Menstrual regulation as contraception. Medieval medical texts often conflated contraceptives with abortifacients. If a woman managed her menstrual cycle, timing intercourse only when bleeding resumed, the logic went that conception couldn't occur. This calendar method required meticulous record-keeping of cycles, treating menstruation like a ticking clock. Women tracked the phases of the moon alongside their bleeding schedules, noting that intercourse during the full moon days was especially risky. Unfortunately, menstrual cycles vary, people forget journals, and moon tracking required candlesticks, astronomers, or sheer guesswork. The payoff? Occasional success and constant anxiety. Divyati, a badger bone on a string. In the filthy back streets of Eastern Europe, legends circulated about a rabbit's foot or badger's bone tied to the lower abdomen. Supposedly, the bone's vital spirit would absorb or deflect sperm. The more grisly the animal, the more potent the charm, so badger bones outranked rabbit feet. Men and women carried these talismans under their shifts or tunics, convinced that a bit of dead wildlife could conquer biology. Historians suspect this was a male-centric myth. After all, who's more likely to trust a carved bone, a superstitious druid, or a midwife's whispered promise? 10. The shocking role of the midwife. You might think midwives only helped with childbirth. In reality, many doubled as clandestine contraception dealers. They distilled belladonna berries to make eye drops that doubled as abortifacients. They prepared opium-laced suppositories that stifled fertility. They convinced noble ladies that a potion made from mummy powder, yes, literally ground-up Egyptian, mummies, would prevent conception. Their fees were high and their success rates unpredictable, especially since they worked under constant threat of witchcraft accusations. One false step and you'd wind up on trial, dragged through the town square in rags, begging for mercy. By now, you're probably thanking heaven for modern medicine, because medieval birth control reads like a horror anthology. But guess what? We're only halfway through the darkest chapter. In part 2, we'll explore the most lethal concoctions, the political weight of forced sterilization, and the unbelievable lengths desperate parents went to avoid 7 hungry mouths at the dinner table. Strap in for more grotesque potions, forbidden spells, and cringe-worthy wisdom straight from dusty manuscripts. Remember, you wanted to know how people survived, and sometimes didn't, in the nightmare of medieval family planning. Stay tuned, because the horror show has only just begun. Brace yourselves, because the descent into medieval madness continues. If you thought discarded crocodile dung and vinegar-soaked wool were brutal, wait until you meet the next wave of contraceptive horror. In part 2, we'll unveil the deadliest potions, the sinister politics behind family planning, and the lengths hyper-desperate parents went to stave off famine-induced famine. Ready for more? Let's dive into the abyss. 11th, Belladonna and Mandrake, the poisonous lovers brew. Enter Belladonna, aka Deadly Nightshade, and Mandrake root, Mandragora officinarum, the rock stars of medieval abortifacients. Midwives and herbalists would soak dried belladonna berries in wine or distilled spirits, urging women to sip the concoction if they felt a surprise life stirring within. Mandrake, with its human-shaped root, was believed to shriek when unearthed, scaring off fertility, provided you didn't die of hallucinatory terror first. Women reported muscle spasms, blurred vision, and hallucinations so vivid they swore they saw the Virgin Mary lecturing them on maternal duty. Voila, potential termination of pregnancy. Or a one-way ticket to the graveyard. By Nirendavde, the mummy bomb. Yes, this one's real. From the 12th to the 16th centuries, mummy powder, literally ground Egyptian mummies sold by charlatans, was mixed with wine as a panacea for everything from headaches to unwanted pregnancies. The aristocracy loved it for its exotic flair, imagining themselves imbibing the paternal wisdom of pharaohs. In reality, they ingested lead, mercury, and decades-old toxins. Contraceptive efficacy, debatable. Mortality, high. Padimundraude. Pokeweed and pennyroyal, potions. Pokeweed, Phytolacca americana, a North American import, and pennyroyal, Mentha pelagium, were boiled into teas that women drank to either delay menstruation or induce abortion. Pennyroyal contains pelargone, a compound toxic to the liver and kidneys. Reports describe women collapsing mid-ceremony, clutching their bellies, half praying, half cursing the day they trusted folklore over a simple calendar. The moral? If you survived, you might never have fertile cycles again. 14. Chastity belts. Fact or fantasy? Pop culture loves to depict iron chastity belts clamped on medieval brides to prevent premarital sex. Archaeological evidence suggests genuine chastity belts are scarce or post-medieval fabrications. However, ecclesiastical decrees occasionally ordered women of questionable virtue into physical restraints for weeks. A grim blend of shame, control, and a clear statement, your body is not yours. Whether real devices or allegorical warnings, chastity belts symbolizes the church and man's desperate attempts to regulate women's reproduction. 15. Urine analysis and fertility forecasts. Medieval physicians believed that a woman's fertile window could be determined by examining her urine's color and clarity. A pale, clear sample meant she was unlikely to conceive, while a stormy, cloudy one spelled imminent fertility. Husbands might delay marital relations until their wives' pee passed inspection by a local leech doctor. Accuracy rate? Think of a coin toss during an earthquake. Unreliable at best, disastrous at worst. 16. Government-sanctioned sterilizations. In periods of extreme famine and plague, some European rulers enforced eugenic policies to stem population collapse. Edicts in the 14th century Florence fined or imprisoned parents who produced excess offspring, and some city-states experimented with forced castration of men deemed prolific. Women accused of bearing too many children could be branded or banished. These early proto-policies read like dystopian fiction, with rulers prioritizing tax revenue over human life. 17. Lead-lined undergarments. For the well-heeled, tailors offered undergarments, breeches or shifts, lined with thin sheets of lead or copper. Supposedly, the metal's coolness would suppress libido and sperm motility. Instead, wearers developed anemia, cognitive decline, and a high risk of stillbirths. Aristocrats may have looked forward to fewer heirs, but they also looked forward to mercury-induced tremors and memory loss. 18. The Zodiac Contraception Chart. Astrologers produced elaborate treatises matching zodiac signs to sexual potency. Couples consulted the stars. Intercourse under a Pisces moon might result in twins. A Leo sun would ensure a son. An Aquarius ascendant meant avoid at all costs. Calendars marked barren days when the moon aligned with Saturn's retrograde. Planets, they proclaimed, ruled fertility. The result? Couples spent more time charting horoscopes than consummating marriages, and still ended up with brood after brood. 19. The torture-inspired mechanical spermicide. One extreme medieval physician described a spring-loaded device inserted into the vagina, designed to expel any semen upon ejaculation. The blueprint called for razor-sharp prongs and a ratchet mechanism, so that removal required a special key, effectively locking the woman in a 5-inch steel coffin until her husband could fetch the locksmith. Fortunately or unfortunately, surviving a prototype test was rare. No working examples have been found, but the text remains, a testament to surgical ambition untempered by empathy. Irreparable. Waxed linen tampons. Some midwives suggested tampons made of linen soaked in beeswax, olive oil, or concoctions of herbs. The material expanded and formed a seal against the cervix. If you thought sponge methods were bad, imagine a hardened beeswax plug lodged so firmly you needed a midwife's hook to remove it, often resulting in tearing, bleeding, and sepsis. Users reported relief in two areas: fear of conception and fear of extraction. 21. The political weight of procreation. In medieval Europe, lineage was power. Noble families sometimes imposed draconian rules on marriage and fertility. Younger sons might be required to join the clergy or military to prevent inheritance disputes. Daughters were paired off strategically to secure alliances, not out of love. A barren noblewoman faced annulment, exiled to a convent, or worse, accusations of witchcraft. Fertility became a political tool, and children were pawns. Forced, childless marriages emerged, where both partners swore abstinence under penalty of fine or imprisonment. It was social engineering before the term existed. Irupati irandaude. The ludicrous lace, myth. A popular legend speaks of a lace or string soaked in a male herbal poison, then tied around a woman's ankle, purported to repel semen like a magnetic field. No credible sources confirmed this method, but rumors spread among peasants who preferred to believe in simple charms over complex herbal infusions. It underscores how fertile myth and desperate hope intertwined in medieval contraceptive lore. Irabati, Munjavde, rituals of abstinence and the nightly vow. Knights took vows of chastity before crusading, sometimes lasting years. They slept alone, wore hair shirts, and applied crude poultices to suppress libido, garlic cloves wedged down there, or chili pepper ointments rubbed on the thighs. These practices aimed to prioritize piety over pleasure, but inevitably led to infections, scarring, and the ironic necessity of medical intervention when the vow ended. Irupati Nangavada, the night soil distraction technique. In rural regions, men sometimes claim to perform fertility-blocking rituals by smearing excrement, human or animal, around their genitals post-intercourse, asserting the repulsive odor would kill sperm. This folk method was less about biology and more about humiliation, punishing wives for perceived laziness in the boudoir. It illustrates the gender dynamics at play. Contraception was a shared burden, yet often the woman bore the physical and psychological cost. Irbatende, the desperate parent's ultimatum. Ultimately, the harshest contraceptive in medieval life was the threat of filicide or abandonment. Some destitute parents, faced with 9 mouths to feed and only 1 loaf of bread, abandoned infants in monasteries, forests, or city gutters. Others resorted to drowning in rivers, starvation, or leaving babies at the mercy of cruel night nurses. This grim reality forced communities to create foundling hospitals, birthing crosses, and early orphanages. The moral: contraception, in its absence, turned families into life or death arbiters. There you have it, 10 more methods that defy belief, ranging from deadly toxins to magical talismans, from state-sanctioned cruelty to parental desperation. Medieval birth control wasn't a matter of planning a beach vacation. It was a raw fight for survival, where every option threatened your health, your freedom, or your soul. Ready for more? In Part 3, we'll unmask the shadowy world of church courts, prosecuting contraceptive users, undercover midwife networks, and the rare successes. Yes, believe it or not, a handful of medieval women actually managed to space their children. We'll also peek into non-European traditions: Chinese silkworm condoms, Japanese herbal pills, and African fertility masks used in reverse. The nightmare continues, so stick around. Your modern birth control has never looked so miraculous. As desperation deepened, medieval men and women turned to ever more elaborate and gruesome means of birth control. Imagine a time when your nearest pharmacy was a shady apothecary who kept you waiting in a dark alley, and your only reliable contraception was sheer terror. Welcome back to the nightmare. 26. The scalding steam trap. In certain castle keeps, ladies were led into small chambers rigged like primitive saunas. A pot of boiling water infused with rue leaves and hemlock sat beneath a wooden bench. Women straddled a perforated seat above, letting the scalding vapors bathe their nether regions. Supposedly, the heat would sterilize the womb. In practice, it caused burns, sepsis, and an excuse to haul victims before the bishop for suspected witchcraft when they couldn't conceive afterward. 27. The coital lock. A misanthropic barber surgeon devised a crude ring of iron, just wide enough to encircle the male member at its base. It was meant to reduce blood flow, dampening desire, and impeding erection once slack. Fit too tight, it cut off circulation entirely, leading to gangrene or permanent impotence. Fit too loose, and it slipped off mid-thrust, clattering onto the floor like a judge's gavel and shattering any remaining romance. 28. The eye drop abortion. Believe it or not, ink-black solutions originally intended to dilate pupils were repurposed. A single drop in each eye triggered hallucinations and vomiting so violent that medieval doctors believed it expelled unborn life. Women staggered about in public squares, clutching their bellies, while priests blessed them against demonic possession. If the pregnancy persisted, blame fell on sinful impurity rather than the faulty method. 29. The nettle leaf suppository. Nettle leaves, famed for their sting, were dried, crushed, and fashioned into little cones. Inserted vaginally post-coitus, The belief was that the fiery nettle would repel sperm with its burning touch. Reports from midwives described women screaming in agony, then collapsing in the fields, convinced they'd miscarried. Modern analysis suggests the trauma induced by the stings was more psychological than contraceptive. 30. The cistern of cold water. Some folk healers recommended squatting over a pail of icy well water immediately after intercourse. The shock of cold was thought to freeze sperm in place, preventing them from moving upward. Victims often ended up with bladder infections, kidney stones, or chronic pelvic pain. At least the method was cheap. Ice was a rare treat, often harvested from frozen rivers in winter and stored in straw pits to last the summer. 31. The rusty needle prick. Here's a method guaranteed to shock you. Some desperate souls asked itinerant surgeons to prick the cervix with a rusty needle, believing that a small wound would block conception. Without anesthesia, infection control, or anatomical knowledge, patients frequently bled to death or developed pelvic inflammatory disease. Surgeons justified this procedure as a mercy, better to risk death than another mouth to feed. 32. The coral bead barrier. Merchants imported coral beads from the Mediterranean, prized for their coolness and purported magical properties. Women were told to insert a single bead into the cervix, trusting its smooth surface to block sperm. Beads got lost or migrated deeper, necessitating painful retrieval by midwives armed with hooks. Even if you survived, you were liable to carry around a literal piece of the sea in your uterus for life. 33. The sun-dried frog jizz. According to a now laughable text, drying a toad or frog until its body liquefied, then mixing the residue with vinegar made an effective spermicide. A spoonful before intercourse was reputed to numb the genitals, both male and female, preventing erection or arousal, and supposedly killing sperm. Side effects included hallucinations, muscle paralysis, and accidental ingestion of bacterial toxins. 34. The beast of burden, contraceptive. A popular regional tale tells of farmers dipping the shafts of their plows into fertility-blocking mud, then sleeping on the damp handle between spouses. The moist wood, they believed, absorbed virility overnight. Skeptics scoffed, but folklore held that if a harvest remained lean, it was because too many couples had taken the precaution of resting on the plow, thus ensuring nobody's loins grew too fertile. 35. The stork's feather. In rural hamlets, superstition reigned supreme. Women carried feathers plucked from stork nests, believing the bird's care for its young would translate into the feather's ability to ward off conception. Feathers were tied to garters or slipped into bodices. When babies arrived despite the charm, villagers whispered that either the feather was fake or the stork had simply gone rogue. 36. The watermelon seed, tonic. Watermelon was a rare treat kept by the wealthy, who scooped out the flesh, dried the seeds, and boiled them into a bitter tea. The seeds contained cucurbitacin, known today to affect sperm motility. Drinkers reported stomach cramps so severe that intercourse became an afterthought, but at least the seeds had a scientific basis, if only the dosage wasn't so toxic that it endangered the liver. 37. Forced fasting and celibacy vows. In some monastic orders, lay couples seeking contraceptive relief approached abbots and abbesses. They were prescribed extreme fasting regimes, bread and water diets that led to amenorrhea, and vows of chastity for fixed periods. Couples accepted the humiliation of communal scorn, hoping ketosis and malnutrition would do the job. Many ended up with permanent metabolic issues and bones as brittle as stale bread. 38. The chalice of virgins' tears. Legend has it that nuns teared up over sinners' confessions, and their tears collected in silver chalices. The droplets, though purely symbolic, were sold as tinctures to noble women desperate to space their heirs. Buyers swore by their divine potency. Skeptics pointed out that tear fluid is mostly salt water. Prices were obscene, yet aristocrats often spent a fortune on nothing more than flecks of dried tear salts. 39. The iron ring of control. A less brutal follow-up to the coital lock involved a pliable iron ring fitted around the hips, tightening when the wearer sat down and loosening when standing. The discomfort was so great that few desired intercourse at all, effectively postponing pregnancy. Nobles favored such devices because it allowed them to decree no children by royal edict without the awkwardness of divorce. 40. The shadow banister test. In shadowy corridors of cathedrals, couples timed their lovemaking so that their bodies cast no shadow against a banister or pillar. If your silhouette extended beyond a certain mark, it was considered full of life and hence fertile. This bizarre method combined artful positioning with church architecture, praying to dodge your own shadow rather than a single sperm cell. Through all these horrors, one thread runs clear. Medieval birth control was an alchemical melting pot of superstition, cruelty, and occasional botanical wisdom. Simple folk remedies sat alongside lethal toxins, and the line between medical innovation and outright torture was paper thin. In Part 4, we'll confront the darkest corners yet, the legal cases against birth control users, the horrifying public shaming rituals, and the early whispers of midwife resistance movements. We'll delve into cross-cultural comparisons, from Norse runic contraceptives to Mesoamerican herbal ballots, and reveal the few miraculous success stories that slipped through the cracks of history. Stay tuned for the finale, where survival meets sacrifice in the ongoing battle to tame humanity's oldest impulse. Medieval family planning may have been flawed beyond belief, but it shaped the world we live in today, one desperate measure at a time. 41. The Inquisition of the Womb. In Catalonia, circa 1472, a court convened specifically to root out child-thwarting sinners. Midwives, herbalists, and suspicious mothers were summoned before a panel of clerics to confess their use of forbidden pessaries or abortive concoctions. Torture chambers doubled as torture-cum laboratories. Under thumbscrews, accused women revealed recipes for rue-laden tinctures and shark liver oils. Convicted witches had their fingers burned with red-hot pokers, then publicly displayed in stocks as a warning. No mercy for anyone who dared stand between God's decree and a bouncing babe. 42. The Pillory of the Perishers. In medieval Toulouse, a draconian law mandated that any woman found in possession of contraceptive herbs faced public humiliation. Offenders were stripped to the waist, tethered to a wooden pillar, and pelted with rotten fruit while townsfolk jeered. The mayor proclaimed this spectacle a civic duty, since children are the king's blessing. Pregnant women cheered from the balconies, clutching their swollen bellies like battle flags, while the condemned bit their lips, praying either for mercy or swift death. 43. The Midwife Underground. By the early 1500s, a loose network of rebel midwives had formed across the Low Countries. Operating under coded names like Sister Yarrow and Mother Henbane, they traded birth control pamphlets by candlelight. Secret meetings took place in barn lofts and disused dovecotes, where they practiced inserting crocus root suppositories and crafting discreet honeyed pessaries. When raided, they scattered through fields of flax, leaving only a trail of lavender sprigs as a breadcrumb path for the next meeting. Their defiance laid groundwork for clandestine women's medical knowledge, long before universities would admit female students. 44. Norse runes of sterility. In the fjords of 11th century Norway, Viking shield maidens carved fertility-blocking runes onto smooth river stones. These sterile stones were carried in leather pouches, their runic inscriptions urging Urd, the fate goddess, to weave a childless tapestry. Archaeological digs have uncovered stones etched with bind runes combining algiz, protection, and hegel, outer disruption, a magical formula meant to thwart conception. When found in women's graves alongside fishing hooks and battle axes, they suggest that even in a warrior culture, controlling reproduction was a secret art. 45. Chinese silkworm sheaths. By the Ming Dynasty, Chinese physicians offered thin silk pouches spun from silkworm cocoons as condoms for men, treated with soot and herbal extracts, notably borneol and peppercorn oil. These liners promised both pleasure and prevention. Manuals like the Compendium of Materia Medica describe their manufacture. Steep the silk in a decoction of peach kernel and tung oil, stretch to fit, then dry over a bamboo frame. Success rates approach 60%, astounding for the era. Emperors' courts hoarded these condoms for concubines, who wore them to prevent unwanted heirs and keep their status intact. 46. Japanese kusurikana pills. In Heian, Japan, court ladies swallowed small ceramic pills called kusurikana, filled with powdered sophora root and alum. The pills induced uterine contractions so mild they often went unnoticed, unless you counted the occasional fainting fit. Earliest Heian diaries mention secret pills of the moon, distributed by temple attendants to noblewomen afraid of bearing too many daughters when the clan needed heirs. 47. Mesoamerican Zapotl contraceptives. Aztec midwives harvested seeds of the zapotl tree, Sapotaceae family, roasting them into a bitter paste mixed with cacao butter. Applied intravaginally, the zapotl paste acted as a spermicide. Chroniclers like Bernardino de Sahagún marveled at its efficacy, noting fewer unexpected pregnancies among noble households. Spanish conquerors, however, condemned its use, equating it with pagan sorcery, and often demanded samples for the royal apothecary, who promptly dismissed them as devilish sludge. 48. African fertility masks in reverse. In parts of West Africa, fertility masks and charms traditionally invoked youthful fecundity, yet ethnographers record a reverse practice. Village elders wearing iron rings embedded with plant resins, derived from wild olive and bandzlul shrubs, as symbols of sterile authority. Young couples seeking contraception would present offerings to these masks, either grain or palm wine, and receive a sachet of groundbark to use as a pessary. It was taboo to discuss openly. The whole ritual played out in hushed whispers under moonlit mango trees. 49. The secret Jesuit formula. In 1620, a Jesuit missionary in Goa documented a Hindu formula for birth control. Grind dried sesame seeds with tamarind pulp and pepper, then apply as a vaginal jelly. He sent the recipe back to Rome, where it was promptly buried in the Vatican archives. Historians later found the parchment mislabeled under vinegar recipes. When rediscovered in the 19th century, it became the only pre-modern Indian contraceptive method to influence Western pharmacology. 50. The rare success stories. Amid the horrors, a handful of medieval women did master the art of spacing children. Noblewoman Eleanor of Aquitaine, according to court gossip, relied on a regime of abstinence, herbal tonics, and carefully timed pilgrimages to avoid pregnancy during critical political seasons. The 14th century Italian Duchess Bianca Maria Visconti is said to have used early diaphragm-like devices made of leather and whalebone, an innovation unique to her personal apothecary. And in 15th century England, the gentlewoman Margaret Paston recorded in her famous letters that she and her husband meticulously tracked her menstrual cycles, avoiding conception during the most fertile intervals. Their marriage produced only 3 children over 20 years, an impressive feat given the era's average of 8. Through forced confessions, barbaric punishments, and whispered rebellions, medieval birth control was a perilous dance between survival and sacrifice. Legal courts wielded the lash, the church brandished excommunication, rulers imposed fines or exile, and only those with cunning or connections to the midwife underground found even a sliver of autonomy. And yet, the desperation to control one's body transcended geography and class. From Viking runes carved on river stones to Mesoamerican paste, from Japanese pills to Jesuit hidden prescriptions, people sought agency over reproduction long before. Modern science made it safe, and even then, success was measured in secret smiles and stolen moments of relief. So the next time you swipe right on an app or pop a pill without a second thought, spare a thought for the women and men who gambled their health, their freedom, and their lives on every rabbit's foot, every bitter tea, every stone etched with magical runes, just to decide if, when, and how many children to bring into a world where each new mouth could tip the scales toward famine, disease, or worse. Hey guys, imagine sneaking into a garden at midnight, heart pounding, breath hitching, only to be dragged before a grim-faced constable who charges you with a crime punishable by fines, public shaming, or worse. Sounds like a modern horror movie, right? Welcome to medieval premarital sex, where a stolen kiss could cost you your reputation, or your head. Before we get too cozy, picture yourself pressed against a muggy storeroom wall, fingers trembling, the only soundtrack the drip of water and distant church bells. One wrong move, and the parish priest's hand flies to his rosary, because churches had spies, and your lover's sheep-counting alibi meant nothing. Ready for the absurdity? Let's dive into why sex outside the bonds of holy matrimony was deemed an outright crime. In medieval Europe, every aspect of life was policed by the church. The Christian doctrine declared sex a sacrament reserved for marriage. Unmarried couples who indulged were accused of fornication, a mortal sin that threatened their souls and the social order. Church councils hammered out intricate rules. No one could engage in intercourse before their wedding night, and any violation risked excommunication. Imagine a world where a priest's scowl could bar you from communion forever, simply because you slipped into a lover's arms before exchanging vows. But the church wasn't content to issue frowns and spiritual doom. Civil authorities codified these moral edicts into secular law. Royal decrees and town charters laid out penalties. First offenses might earn you a public whipping or a night in the stocks. Repeat offenders faced hefty fines, branding, or banishment. In some regions, local magistrates seized the unmarried couple's belongings, turning stolen passion into state revenue. Venereal sin was taxable, and churches counted on those pew coins to fund their next cathedral spire. Male and female bodies were under constant surveillance. Unmarried women accused of bearing a child were presumed guilty of fornication. Midwives tracked pregnancies and whispered names in confessions. Gossip spread rumors faster than a plague. Clever couples attempted to fake kidnappings, claiming the bride was stolen by highwaymen to forestall forced marriage or legal wrath. Yet even these elaborate ruses often unraveled under the weight of inquisitorial scrutiny, leaving the innocent-looking lovers paraded in their shift and breeches before an angry throng. Virginity was currency. For noble families, a daughter's chastity meant alliances, dowries, and political clout. Premarital sex threatened lineage purity and inheritance claims. If a noble woman lost her honor, her marriage prospects plummeted. Her father's aspirations for titles and lands went up in scandalous smoke. Thus, knights and squires formed patrolling groups, sometimes called chastity bands, tasked with ensuring maidens remained untouched until the altar. They roamed manor corridors at night, checking windows and closets like some medieval dating app gone very, very wrong. Yet enforcement varied wildly by social class. Peasants paid fines in goods, chickens, bushels of grain, or labor on the Lord's fields, while aristocrats bribed officials with gold to look the other way. Clergy sometimes colluded, especially if a handsome squire slipped a few coins into the collection plate. But moral panic could still sweep through every layer of society. When a sudden rash of scandals hit a town, too many barn trysts discovered, authorities enacted temporary curfews, banned nighttime strolls, and mandated all lovers report to the parish office for a monthly purity check. The anxiety around premarital sex wasn't purely religious. Medieval medicine, as sketchy as it was, warned that unregulated passion could unbalance bodily humors. Physicians preached that illicit intercourse sent heat and moisture galloping through the veins, causing madness, infertility, or bile-soaked ulcers. They prescribed abstinence or strict routines. Men should limit rousing games, women should scrub with herbal tonics. The fear of internal corruption meant that a nocturnal embrace was rumored to seed diseases worse than any plague, though the actual culprit was often poor hygiene and overcrowded hovels. Courts employed lurid testimonies to enforce morality. Neighbors swore they heard squeaks and moans through the hedges. Farmhands testified they saw straw bales shifting inexplicably. Accused lovers endured humiliations, forced to recite prayers in the town square, brandish placards declaring I was unchaste, or stand barefoot in icy streams. Some jurisdictions held fornication festivals, where couples were tied together and dunked until they confessed. Even children knew the chant, whores and strumpets find no grace beneath God's holy place. And yet, reality clashed with doctrine every day. Young men and women starved for connection in villages thrumming with loneliness. Feast days and harvest dances brimmed with ale and erotic energy. Temptation perched at every corner. Many believed that if you waited too long, passion would sour into regret. Secret rendezvous danced to a rhythm of moonlight in crowded church fairs. Lovers exchanged charms, flowers steeped in wine, carved hazel sticks or prayer scrolls to ward off meddling priests and gossiping matrons. Despite the draconian rules, some communities developed rituals of forgiveness. A repentant couple could appear before the parish priest, perform penance, perhaps a pilgrimage or a lengthy fast, and be absolved of fornication. They paid a fine, maybe planted a tree in the churchyard, and then resumed courting under the watchful eye of the parish clerk. For a time at least, their sin was expunged, and marriage could proceed without scandal. Yet penance offered little comfort to those punished harshly. European travelers recorded women whipped with nettles, men forced to wear belts of red-hot iron, and entire families ostracized for a single child born out of wedlock. In some fringe areas, rulers mandated that any unmarried couple caught in the act be wed on the spot, often pairing mismatched partners as a means of swift moral correction. The message: if you can't keep your clothes on, you might as well bear the full burden of marriage and its consequences. As the centuries wore on, reformers and humanists began to question these severe measures. Renaissance thinkers argued that love, pleasure, and choice were natural, worthy of poetry rather than penance. Yet codified laws lingered. Even into the 17th century, colonial magistrates in New England hanged individuals for fornication and adultery. Only with the Enlightenment and the gradual secularization of law did premarital sex cease to be a capital crime, but the moral weight persisted in folk traditions and prudish customs. So there you have it, the first glimpse into the medieval nightmare where a tryst could summon the bishop, the bailiff, and a chorus of angry neighbors. Premarital sex was a crime because it threatened the church's authority, the social order of lineage and inheritance, and the flimsy theories of medieval medicine. Next time, we'll explore specific legal codes, shocking case studies, and the ingenious and absurd evasions couples devised to dodge disgrace. Stay tuned because Part 2 will expose the salacious court records, the notorious fornication rolls, and the astonishingly brutal punishments that make our modern taboos look downright lenient. Medieval history has never been so scandalous, or so wildly entertaining. The local fornication roll crackles under the magistrate's quill as he records yet another pair of flushed, literally adolescents caught behind the mill wheel. In Part 2, we dive headlong into the laws, case studies, and jaw-dropping evasions that made premarital passion one of the medieval justice system's favorite spectacles. By the 12th century, church synods had compiled exhaustive lists of forbidden acts. The Decretum of Gratian declared that any carnal union before the bond of marriage was not just sinful, but a crime against the public weal. Bishops dispatched archdeacons to villages armed with registers. Every unchaperoned couple, every woman spotted on the husband's doorstep after dusk, went straight into the diocesan files. Fines weren't fixed, they scaled by social rank. A peasant's guilt meant a bushel of wheat and a night in the stocks. A knight's error could cost him a horse or his stirrups. Case study: the Sheep Count Alibi, circa 1247, East Anglia. Marjorie and John, both 22, pleaded that they were with the Lord's flock at twilight, counting ewes. The jury of tithing men, all seasoned shepherds, exploded in laughter. Your flocks were over the hill at that hour. No one counts sheep in the dark except to lull themselves into sleep. Guilty, they were ordered to stand at the market cross, each clutching a clay jug of water, and chant the Miserere psalm until the rain washed off their tears. The bailiff pocketed a fine of 3 pence apiece, the value of half a sheep. Secular rulers codified church decrees into common law. The 1275 Statute of Westminster in England explicitly banned carnal copulation outside marriage, punishable by corporal pain and property seizure. French ordonnance rolls display similar clauses. Villages had to convene quarterly fornicators' courts. Town criers announced deadlines. Anyone wanting to admit guilt could avoid the stocks by paying a penance fine. Reducing public shaming, too. Transactional theater. Isabel, daughter of a Breton goldsmith, was discovered in an illicit affair with a student from the university. The rector, outraged by the taint on academic holiness, convened a special tribunal. Isabel's family bribed the bailiff's clerk to swap her ledger entry with that of a merchant's sow. For 3 weeks, the sow endured the stocks instead of Isabel, until a squealing witness blew the cover. The bailiff's clerk was hanged, the sow mercifully released, and Isabel had to wear a donkey's mask through the market for a fortnight. The goldsmith reimbursed the butcher who scoured the stench off his daughter's mask, another expense in the bizarre long costs of virtue. Across the Holy Roman Empire, city charters spelled out forbidden beds in grotesque detail. Nuremberg's 1401 ordinance required couples caught red-hot in the sheets to undergo the trial by bed. The bedposts dragged them before the town council, where they'd be questioned under oath. Confession meant public whipping. Denial invited torture by water immersion, where suspects were dunked until they confessed or drowned. At least a drowning death spared endless public ridicule. Ingenious evasions and ruses, fornication laws inspired a Byzantine array of dodge and weave strategies. The sleeping chamber swap. Couples rented rooms in the dead of night, signaling each other with kerchiefs tied to balcony rails. Once inside, they swapped clothes with a chambermaid or stable hand, emerging at dawn in borrowed cloaks, too disheveled to be recognized. If accused, they blamed itinerant pilgrims whose livery matched theirs. Fake betrothal contracts, a forged parchment, complete with wax seals and notarized by a corrupt clerk, allowed lovers to claim they were already bound by marriage. Many town courts had never seen real marriage contracts and accepted these documents at face value, granting the benefit of clergy a more lenient ecclesiastical trial. When the forgery surfaced months later, charges were dropped due to clergy privilege, leaving the couple legally married after all. The water carrier's confession. In some German towns, water carriers were required to testify at purity checks, verifying that unmarried women stayed out of brothels. Unscrupulous couples bribed carriers to falsely testify they'd seen the woman hauling water at dawn, thus proving her domestic virtue. The town council dutifully erased the woman's name from the fornication roster until the next purity check rolled around. Midnight pilgrimages. Claiming to embark on a pilgrimage to a local shrine at dusk conferred temporary immunity. Anyone on a devout journey couldn't be tried until they returned. Often weeks later, sneaking back under cover of darkness, couples reclaimed their illicit right to commerce without fear of immediate arrest. Magistrates later defined the term pilgrim as one who carried a token staff and worn sandal sole, criteria easily met with a loaf of bread and some cheap leather. Pregnancy as protective penance. Ironically, becoming pregnant outside marriage could grant a reprieve from criminal guilt. Women puffed up their stomachs with pillows, smeared themselves with fragrant oils to simulate pregnancy glow, and paraded before inquisitors. Medical examiners, little more than barber-certified leechers, felt for a fetal heartbeat, actually the carrier's pulse, and declared them with child. Suddenly, the council ordered swift marriage or a convent placement, but forgave them from corporal punishment. The editor of one Bavarian town's records lamented, half the pregnant women were more with drink than child. Punishments varied regionally but shared a common theme: public spectacle. Normandy's wood of shame ritual forced offenders to march naked to a specific alder tree, where villagers tied them to branches and hurled mud cakes until they begged for release. Venetian gondolas sometimes ferried cringe-worthy couples past crowded canals, displayed under lantern light for jeering merchants. German Holy Week, already grim, featured condemned bachelors forced to leap from church balconies into hay carts below, while unmarried brides were chased by rabid dogs trained to bark at immodest ankles. The role of midwives and confessional spies midwives occupied a perilous middle ground. Officially licensed to deliver babies, they also carried knowledge of herbal abortifacients and contraceptives. Parish priests paid them hush money to keep pregnant, unmarried girls quiet until a legal marriage could be arranged. When the church launched moral crackdowns, midwives were primary targets, summoned by bishops for interrogation. They revealed names of clients under threat of losing license or worse. This betrayal network fortified ecclesiastical power, until midwives began swapping coded messages sewn into caps, helping prisoners escape and smuggle contraband pessaries into jails. Confessionals served as black boxes of moral surveillance. Priests kept mental ledgers of parishioners' sins. One loose tongue in a booth, confessing temptation, counted as an admission of intent. Repeat visitors for delectation with beauty, modern euphemism, were tracked, and bishops sometimes placed warning candles on their doorsteps, signifying the household's status as sin-rich. Visitors to confession might encounter trapdoors in pews, dropping onto hard benches if they hesitated too long before naming names. No wonder so many whispered their darkest secrets through gritted teeth. Medical justifications and humoral hysteria. Physicians wielded humoral theory to back secular laws. Illicit sex was said to create an imbalance of choler and phlegm, causing ulcerous growths in the groin. Legal codes referenced these miseries. A woman caught in adultery required leeching and cupping, paid for by the fornicator, lest her corrupted humors infect the local well. Medieval medical texts, like the Trotula Compendium, outlined specific treatments for such sin-induced maladies, reinforcing the notion that premarital passion was a health hazard, and a legal one. Doctors sometimes appeared in court as expert witnesses brandishing animal parts, bear's gallbladder, stag's bladder, to demonstrate the physical consequences of interracial or interclass liaisons. Their testimonies could sway jurors. "Heaven forbid your daughter's womb mingle with the seed of a cobbler," they declared, invoking both class prejudice and pseudoscience to justify stonings or exile. Town ordinances and the fetters of urban life. As towns swelled, municipal councils added layers of regulation. In Tallinn, Rival, a woman accused of fornication was forced to wear a red fornicator's bonnet for a year, visible proof of her transgression. Merchants in Bruges passed a bylaw banning secret greetings in back alleys. Those caught greeting without at least one chaperone suffered 6 strokes of the birch. In Milan, a magistrate issued a decree: no kisses exchanged under city walls, effectively outlawing any nighttime promenade through the gates. By the late 14th century, some cities even printed handbills listing wanted fornicators, complete with crude woodcut portraits. Citizens were encouraged to notify the nearest lawman of any sightings, yielding hefty rewards. These bulletin boards became a medieval version of social media, where reputations were ruined by a single careless smooch. Yet where there was a law, there was a way around it. By the 15th century, clandestine churches offered secret marriage services, performing nuptials in hidden chapels for true lovers who wanted to legitimize their union on the spot. Renting these chapels required a hefty fee and discretion, but it guaranteed that if caught in the act, the couple could present a valid marriage certificate and walk away scot-free. Word spread by letter and travelers' tales. For a silver groat, any priest in this alley will bless you in 5 minutes flat. As we peel back the layers of medieval obsession with premarital sex, we find a tapestry woven from fear, power, and ingenuity. Laws dripped with moral righteousness but reeked of corruption. Punishments oscillated between petty spectacle and cruel torture. Communities oscillated between punitive zeal and covert complicity, all of which begs the question: who truly benefited from criminalizing love? In Part 3, we'll haul out the most scandalous trial transcripts, accusations of nocturnal goat sacrifices, knights buried alive, and even a case where an entire convent petitioned for the release of 3 errant novices caught in flagrante. We'll explore the slow unraveling of these laws as Renaissance humanists and Enlightenment thinkers chipped away at medieval jurisprudence. Until then, remember, the next time you sneak a late-night kiss, you're gambling with centuries of legal precedent, thankfully now filed under quaint curiosity rather than high treason. The magistrate's quill hesitates as he scans the parchment. On the night of Michaelmas, in the year of our Lord, 1324, 3 novices of St. Hildegard's convent, Sisters Agnetha, Bertha, and Christine, were discovered cavorting in the chapel's sacristy. Charges: fornication with unknown man. Their faces stare back from crude woodcut portraits nailed to the pillory. Townsfolk gather at dawn to witness their fates: 12 lashes apiece, a year's exile, and an eternity of whispered shame. Yet this is but one among dozens of scandalous trials recorded in the Fornicatrix Libri, the bound collection of criminal fornication cases used by ecclesiastical courts across Christendom. Here are a few more that will make your jaw hit the pew. The Midnight Goat Sacrifice, Florence, 1351. Countess Beatrice de Montepulciano was accused of pagan rites after neighbors swore they heard bleating and unholy chants beneath the olive groves. Upon investigation, the rector found a half-bleached goat skull inscribed with runes asking Diana to release me from these fleshly chains. Beatrice denied any intent to thwart procreation. She insisted she sought spiritual ecstasy. The court disagreed. Goat DNA on her undergarments was deemed incontrovertible proof of witchcraft and fornication. She was forced to burn the skull before the cathedral doors, her wrists branded with an A for adulteress, and spend 3 months begging in the marketplace. The Case of the Forest Pantomime, Saxon Lands, 1378. A band of itinerant players staged an erotic masque in a moonlit glade. Masked actors dramatized the seduction of a noblewoman by a masked knight. Villagers, enraptured, joined in, dancing until dawn. When the local bailiff arrived, he tore off masks to identify participants: 11 peasants, 2 burgesses, and the local reeve's daughter. All were dragged to the gallows field, where they were instructed to reenact the performance, this time rigged with hidden bells so their every illicit movement jingled for onlookers. Afterward, They were fined, humiliated, and forced to swear off theater forever. The notorious wine barrel embrace, Bordeaux 1392. A group of middle-class couples trysted inside a wine cellar, wedged behind barrels to muffle their moans. Unfortunately, the cellar rat infestation drew attention. Squeaks and scratching alerted the vintner. The magistrate charged the pairs with causing public concern and defiling the sanctity of commerce. Penalty: each woman carried a rotten grape cluster through the market while men hauled empty barrels. The judge proclaimed this an exemplary crushing of lust, and local merchants installed better locks. These pay-per-view spectacles reinforced fear, but constant trials also bred creative evasions. The sheriff's shadow, a ruse. Lovers enlisted a lanky night watchman to cast his shadow over them during nighttime assignations. When caught, they pointed to the looming silhouette on the wall, claiming it was evidence of supernatural seduction. Thus, sufficient grounds for absolution by the parish exorcist. The charitable fornicator, loophole. In Languedoc, penitents discovered that public acts of charity, giving bread to the poor on 3 consecutive Fridays, could commute corporal punishment. Sinners confessed, received lashes, then immediately distributed alms in front of the judge, converting spectacle into piety. The sacred vessel swap, couples bought cheap earthenware jugs stamped with biblical scenes. After intercourse, they exchanged jugs in the marketplace, under the argument that each had fulfilled a sacramental trade of goods, thus rebinding their transgression as commerce, not sex. By the Renaissance, voices rose against these draconian measures. Humanists like Petrarch and Erasmus decried the Church's obsession with sin counting. In his letters, Petrarch lamented how our sacred beds have become courts of judgment, while Erasmus's In Praise of Folly satirized clerical spies who prowled cloister corridors with lanterns and lutes. Yet legal reforms came slowly. The Concordat of Bologna, 1516, between Francis I and Pope Leo X, granted French kings the power to regulate ecclesiastical courts, yet premarital sex statutes persisted. In Venice, the Council of Ten reduced penances for first-time fornication in 1538, replacing public flogging with a fine and mandatory confession. But in Milan, a 1543 edict doubled the required lashes for noble offenders, citing the need to preserve Christian bloodlines. Meanwhile, midwives and secret networks quietly undermined the system. Under cover of childbirth duties, they smuggled contraceptive recipes and false pregnancy certificates. In Rouen, midwife Jeanne Lanoir orchestrated a grand ruse in 1497. 20 pregnant brides-to-be paraded through the town, begging for marriage licenses. Nobles and clerics, moved by pity, arranged immediate weddings, only to discover weeks later that the swelling bellies were punkas of wool and bran. Jeanne vanished into the countryside, leaving behind a scandal that prompted archbishopric decrees against midwife collusion. Yet the underground thrived. Public sentiment also shifted. As plague and war reduced populations, rulers recognized the financial blow of endless bastard classes. Henry VIII's 1534 Act of Supremacy dissolved monastic courts, vesting marital jurisdiction in secular magistrates. These courts prioritized fines and marriage ceremonies over brutal spectacle. In England's Old Bailey records, mid-16th century, one finds sentences like, "Fornicator shall pay 2 shillings and marry within 30 days. A far cry from the stocks and branding irons of prior centuries. Cross-cultural exchange accelerated change. Missionaries returning from the Ottoman Empire reported lax attitudes toward premarital sex in certain rural Anatolian communities, where informal unions called kiz katsi were tolerated if the couple contributed taxes. In Iberia, converso families adopted Sephardic leniencies. Cohabitation without formal marriage was treated as shorthand for wedlock, provided the couple maintained communal standing. Even so, the stigma lingered long after the law's teeth were blunted. 17th century diaries show wives anxiously inspecting their husbands for signs of clandestine meetings. Young lovers feared their reputations ruined by a single slip. The term bastard remained legally codified in inheritance laws well into the 18th century, ensuring that the shadow of premarital sex outlasted corporal punishment. By the Enlightenment, philosophes like Voltaire and Diderot lambasted medieval morality as fear dressed in piety. Influenced by John Locke's theories of natural rights, legislators began distinguishing private conduct from public crime. The 1789 French Revolutionary Assembly abolished laws against fornication, declaring personal virtue beyond state jurisdiction. Britain followed suit in 1828, repealing the last ecclesiastical fornication statutes. Yet cultural remnants persisted. Victorian prudery resurrected moral policing, this time invoking public decency rather than sin. Courtship rituals, chaperones, and calling cards echo medieval concerns over reputation and lineage, proof that once a society codifies shame, it takes centuries to unlearn it. So ends part 3 of our expose, a tapestry woven from courtroom dramas, clandestine networks, and the slow gleam of reform. We've seen sisters branded, goat skulls incinerated, and novices whipped. We've marveled at midwives outwitting inquisitors and towns rewriting their laws. We've traced the arc from public spectacle to private conscience. In our final installment, part 4, we will confront the human stories behind the statutes, the lovers who risked exile for a single night, the families torn apart by secret births, the poets who dared to sing of desire, and the legacy this medieval obsession bequeathed to our modern world. Stay tuned for the grand finale, where history's darkest follies illuminate our own notions of love, sin, and freedom. In the flickering torchlight of a moonlit barn, Lady Cecily and her tailor's apprentice, Thomas, pressed together with a fervor that defied every statute and moral decree. Cecily's silken shift pooled at her feet, its embroidered lilies crushed beneath Thomas's calloused boots. Their breaths came in rapid whispers, she terrified of discovery, he exhilarated by risk. Behind the hay bales, they exchanged promises framed by urgent gasps, promises destined to shatter against morning's cold reality. When dawn crept in, Cecily crept away, leaving Thomas to sneak back to the tailor's shop, scars of love's secret etched into both their souls. Later, her father would learn of her abduction, an accusation he preferred over admitting she'd betrayed his name. In the hush of the manor's solar, he struck a bargain. Thomas would wed Cecily, forfeiting his apprenticeship and future earnings, while the family's coffers swallowed the cost of scandal. The wedding took place beneath grim faces and whispered condolences, Cecily's smile forced, Thomas's joy subdued by guilt and the memory of stolen kisses in that barn. Meanwhile, across the North Sea, the poet Johannes of Lübeck penned his illicit verses under the threat of censorship. His sonnet to a maiden's secret began, "Your crimson lips outshine the autumn rose, yet guilt's black thorn bestabs our shared repose." Each line risked excommunication. The church banned erotic poetry, demanding that all literature uplift souls toward divine contemplation. Johannes circulated his sonnets in cipher, copyists reworking stanzas under dim window slits. When his manuscript reached Archbishop Albrecht, he seized the pages and summoned Johannes for spiritual re-education. The poet's punishment, 6 weeks of silent labor in the cathedral choir, forced to chant psalms instead of lovelorn lyrics. Yet rumor claims that fluttering pages of his banned sonnet still circulate in taverns, hidden beneath tankards of mead. In the damp cellars of Avignon, twins Louis and Marguerite, children of a disgraced noble, endured a fate reserved for the most notorious sinners, donning the shame of the siblings. The two were handcuffed back to back, their garments stripped, and led through city streets as a living spectacle of incest's sin, even though their crime was merely being unmarried and pregnant at the same time. Though they pleaded separation, magistrates decreed the twins must atone together, their shame doubling the city's amusement. Their public ordeal ended only when a sympathetic merchant bought their release, forcing Marguerite into marriage and Louis into an army regiment bound for Italy, both separated forever by a crime neither truly committed. Not all stories end in state-mandated misery. In the rugged highlands, shepherd Ewan MacLeod fell for schoolmistress Fiona Campbell during a harsh winter when farms lay empty. Lacking access to midwives or potions, they relied on the oldest form of all, abstinence born of extreme discomfort. Layers of wool, skins, and peat smoke kept Fiona's hearth alight while Ewan huddled outside, feet frostbitten, waiting until spring thaw. Their reunion, beneath a blossoming hawthorn, was less about passion and more about relief, two bodies thawing after months of enforced chastity. Their tale became local legend, a testament to endurance, devotion, and the absurd extremes lovers would brave to dodge both pregnancy and prosecution. As Renaissance light crept across Europe, humanists began to question the very foundations of these punishments. In Venice, courtiers whispered of a certain Lorenzo de' Medici, rumored to have bribed papal officials to legalize discreet marriages for his children's secret lovers. Though no record survives, his contemporaries noted a shift. Doges began redirecting fines collected from fornication into public hospitals rather than the church coffers. The money built ward after ward, ironically saving lives ruined by the same health hazards once punished as sins. Convents that once specialized in penance and exile opened infirmaries where women could seek medical care without fear of arrest. By the dawn of the 17th century, undercurrents of change bore fruit in England's Inns of Court. Law students, inspired by common law's flexibility, drafted model petitions arguing that consenting adults' private acts should lie beyond state purview. These early briefs cited Aristotle's natural law and Aquinas' distinction between sin and crime. Judges, itching for reform, quietly allowed first-time offenders to purchase a simple certificate of moral reconciliation, rather than endure cruel spectacles. The fornicator's fine became a nominal fee, trading bloodied stocks for ink on parchment. Yet cultural and legal legacies endured long after formal statutes fell by the wayside. Didactic plays in Elizabethan theaters still mocked sudden marriages forced by revelations of premarital passions. In Jacobin courts, a noblewoman's reputation hinged on her maidenhead certificate, a document verifying virginity under penalty of perjury. Even as Enlightenment ideals championed personal liberty, parish registers recorded bastardy bonds, binding fathers to support children born outside marriage, a holdover from medieval communal responsibility. Across the Atlantic, Puritan New England settlers transplanted old laws almost wholesale. Under the Massachusetts Body of Liberties, 1641, fornication warranted public whippings and scarlet letters akin to those in parental Europe. Only in the late 18th century, influenced by Enlightenment reformers like Samuel Adams and John Adams, did colonial assemblies abolish corporal punishments for private sexual conduct, freeing the next generation to court in parlors rather than pillories. In Japan, the Tokugawa shogunate's code of etiquette, inherited from Confucian teachings, criminalized shinju, lover's suicide, as a crime against social order. Yet it tolerated clandestine kabuki plays depicting doomed romances, an ironic nod to the enduring power of love under prohibition. The forbidden dances of courtesans in Yoshiwara, though technically illegal, became cultural touchstones illustrating how art and desire outlast legal constraints. By the end of our journey, the medieval obsession with policing love emerges as a tapestry of fear, power, and human ingenuity. From barn rendezvous beneath straw to coded poetry smuggled in briefcases, from twins punished for scandal to reformers drafting the blueprint for modern privacy, the story of premarital sex as a crime reveals as much about our need for control as our enduring hunger for connection. So next time you hear debates over moral legislation or public decency laws, remember Cecily and Thomas in that cold barn, Johannes' stolen sonnets, and the twins shackled through Avignon streets. Their struggles formed the backdrop against which modern Western societies gradually disentangled sin from crime, carving out the sanctuary of private life. The shock of medieval punishment still echoes in vestigial customs, chaperones at parties, prenuptial agreements, marriage licenses filed in city halls. But the true victory lies in the simple act of consenting adults holding hands without fear of chains, pens, or public shame. And that, dear viewer, is how the crime of love was born, enforced, and eventually dethroned, one stubborn heart at a time. Hey guys, picture this. You're lying in a drafty stone chamber, trying to drown out the groans of the village ox and failing, when suddenly you hear the locals whispering that if you scratch in just the right spot, you might summon a demon womb. Sounds like a fever dream. Welcome to medieval beliefs about female pleasure, where science, superstition, and sheer terror collided in the most absurd ways imaginable. Imagine a curious midwife brandishing a live frog over a woman's belly, chanting incantations to soothe the restless womb, only to have the poor frog hop away and the patient start screaming about phantom tickles. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where pleasure for women was treated like a contagious plague. First off, let's get one thing clear. Medieval scholars didn't really think women deserved pleasure. The The dominant medical texts, think Galen meet God, declared female desire unnatural, a byproduct of excess blood and black bile. Women's bodies were cold and moist receptacles for men's hot, dry seed. Any heat or moisture in a woman was seen as evidence of disease rather than delight. To cure the illness of female arousal, physicians prescribed bleeding, purging, or application of leeches, all while insisting the poor lady had simply caught the pleasure pox. According to the humoral theory, a woman's clitoris was essentially a failed testicle, an underdeveloped male organ that served no glorious purpose beyond mischief. Medieval anatomists labeled it a monstrous appendage, warning that if stimulated, it could erupt into madness. To cure this monstrosity, some midwives recommended binding the pelvic region with tight linen strips soaked in vinegar. If that didn't work, they suggested inserting a cauterizing rod heated in coals, an early brutal version of torture masquerading as medical treatment. Then there was the infamous wandering womb. Believe it or not, physicians thought the uterus could detach and roam through the woman's body, causing fits, fainting, and inexplicable laughter, or worse, spontaneous orgasms. Treatment involved placing a bowl of fragrant herbs and sweet-smelling oils near her nose to lure the womb back into place. Imagine arranging bouquets of rosemary and jasmine in a woman's underwear drawer, praying her uterus follows the scent like a cow to pasture. Next up, the sorcery of hysterical suffocation. Hysteria, derived from the Greek for womb, was considered a deadly condition where the womb climbed up a woman's throat, blocking breathing and inducing convulsions. To address this dire emergency, doctors recommended smoking out the patient with incense or having male relatives sniff pungent onions and then approach her mouth, believing the fumes would repel the womb back down. If that failed, they advised a good thwack on the belly or a dose of mercury wine, because nothing says medical expertise like heavy metals in your digestive tract. Not all remedies were so conspicuously cruel. Some herbalists swore by the pleasure root, a plant we now recognize as a wild carrot. Women were told to chew its seeds to heighten sensitivity and awaken dormant passions. The effect? A mild increase in blood flow if you survived the ensuing nausea and hallucinations. Reports vary. Some women claimed profound ecstasy, while others vomited in the poorhouse courtyard for days. But hey, at least it wasn't a heated iron rod. Despite the church's disdain for sexual enjoyment, clergy occasionally got curious. One 13th century monk recommended reading select psalms aloud during intercourse, insisting the divine words would sanctify each tremble. He also noted that couples should position their bodies so that the wife lay on top, an unthinkable inversion of gender roles, but defended it as a spiritual exercise. Let her boss him for once, and the Lord may grant her mercy. This advice circulated quietly in monastic libraries, seldom making it into polite conversation. Courtly love troubadours added poetic flair to these debates. They equated a woman's blush with a rose's opening petals, idealizing coy smiles while ignoring the engine room entirely. Meanwhile, popular ballads warned that a woman who moaned too loudly risked accusations of witchcraft. Such was the price of pleasure, gratitude from your spouse, or a one-way ticket to the stake. Meanwhile, midwives sold joy powders, mixtures of dried mandrake, clover blossoms, and crushed pearls that promised to transform a drab bedchamber into a scene of Dionysian revelry. Applied externally or sprinkled over linen, these powders were expensive and rare, often confiscated by local sheriffs during anti-witch hunts. Women discovered in possession of such powders faced trials where the only defense was to cry real tears, thus proving their innocence by simulating true distress rather than ecstatic delight. The irony? Many of these bizarre treatments backfired spectacularly. Women subjected to repeated bloodletting lost so much strength they could barely stand, let alone experience anything near pleasure. Vinegar-soaked bindings caused skin ulcers, mercury led to tremors and madness, incense smoke sometimes triggered fatal lung infections. The net result, women endured a litany of horrors under the guise of medical necessity, all because their natural responses threatened the era's patriarchal order. Yet beneath the cruelty lay a kernel of curiosity. Some enlightened thinkers, like Hildegard of Bingen, observed that women's desire was integral to marriage and procreation. She recommended simple comforts, warm baths, gentle massage with olive oil, soft beds, as far better than bitter potions. but her writings were cloistered in convents, shared only among nuns who practiced mutual massage as both medical therapy and spiritual communion. The wider world remained blissfully unaware of such compassionate counsel. This is just the beginning of our plunge into the madness of medieval beliefs about female pleasure. In part 2, we'll explore the scandalous case of the Laughing Nun, the underground pleasure cults that met in ruined abbeys, and the dark magic of erotic love charms that courts outlawed with death sentences. Believe me, you don't want to miss the recipes that combined crocodile dung and nightshade, guaranteed to shock even the most hardened modern viewer. So stay tuned, keep your wits about you, and remember, in medieval times, pleasure was less a rite than a crime scene waiting to happen. 11. The Laughing Nun's Convulsion Cure. In a secluded wing of St. Aldhelm's Abbey, Sister Marguerite developed a peculiar malady. Sudden fits of laughter so intense they left her gasping for breath. Physicians declared it a case of ecstatic hysteria, believing her womb had danced its way into divine rapture. The prescribed remedy? A regimen of whipping mixed with prayer. The abbess would flog Marguerite's lower back with soft willow branches while chanting the Miserere, to humble both body and spirit. If the whipping failed, the abbey's herbalist would administer draughts of rue and wormwood, two herbs so bitter that any subsequent laughter was attributed to poison rather than pleasure. Marguerite's convulsions ceased, but she spent her final days stooped, a cautionary memorial to the perils of ungoverned joy. Banirendaude, erotic love charms and their fatal trials. Across Europe, clandestine enchantresses hawked love knots, cords woven from hair, rose petals, and the carved tooth of a hare. Wear one around your waist, and any man who glimpsed your ribbon-wrapped silhouette would be struck mute with fervor. The church banned these charms in 1282, decreeing that use of any incantation or philter constituted witchcraft. Offenders were tried before inquisitors. In Salamanca, Señora Inés Maravilla protested her innocence, insisting her belt was no more than decorative trinketry. When the wax seals affixed to her cords matched those of known apothecaries, she was burned at the stake, her screams echoing like a warning that female pleasure could literally go up in flames. Premarital, the secret pleasure cults of abandoned abbeys. In the ruins of Glenmore Abbey, rumors spread of midnight gatherings, an all-female cabal known as the Daughters of Euphrosyne. They met under moonlight, stripped of their veils, and danced a ritual meant to awaken the sacred joy of the flesh. Menstruating women held vials of moon water collected from rain-soaked chalices, believed to heighten sensation when sprinkled on skin. The local magistrate, upon discovering the footprints in the nave, smeared with sandalwood oil, declared it demon worship, and sealed the abbey doors. Yet whispers persisted of secret tunnels leading to the convent's crypt, where the cult endured, whispering that remembrance of pleasure was the only path to true holiness. 14. Phallic totems and clitoral suppression. In some regions, male scholars took it upon themselves to correct female depravity with bizarre contraptions. A 14th century Bavarian surgeon crafted a bronze cap designed to suppress the clitoris, small spikes pressed gently against the offending organ like an erotic chastity device inverted. Women were sewn into these caps for months, the metal rim held in place by laces tied around the waist. Intended to cool the excessive heat of desire, the caps caused painful abscesses. Yet when removed, women reported a dulled sensitivity that convinced doctors their treatments were effective. The contraption's design survived in sketchbooks, inspiring nightmares in medical students for centuries. But the acidic pessary of Mother Hecate, deep in the woods of Bohemia, an herbal widow named Mother Hecate claimed a secret formula, a suppository of vinegar, crushed poppy seeds, and nightshade extract that would render a woman immune to sinful arousal. Women traveled miles to her forge-like hut, where they endured bone-chilling initiation rites. Insert the pessary at dusk, Mother Hecate instructed, and your womb would contract in stony sleep until the next moon's rise. Many succumbed to infection or poisoning. A few, miraculously, reported months of tranquility, though later confessed postpartum to unanticipated births. Mother Hecate vanished after a church-led raid in 1449, but her acidic legacy lingered in terrified whispers. Badinard, the mandrake mandala, mandrake root, famed for its anthropomorphic shape and shrieking burial legend, formed the centerpiece of a grotesque pleasure denial ritual. Female patients were bound in a circular pattern around a freshly unearthed mandrake, each given a clove of garlic to chew. As the root's legend dictated, if the root screamed upon being pulled, the sound would harm the soul of any woman who succumbed to passion within the circle. This mandala of terror was more psychological than practical. Women emerged pale, trembling, convinced their bodies bore the mandrake's curse, even if no root lay beneath the stones. Padineravde. Aromatic inhalation therapy. Some physicians recommended inhaling the fumes of love-abhorring mist. Vials of crushed wormwood, hemlock, and brimstone were heated over coals. Women crouched over the cauldron, a linen hood draped over their heads to trap the vapors. 10 deep breaths, the doctors assured, would purge the womb of licentious miasma. Instead, victims reported dizziness, nausea, and in severe cases, respiratory collapse. Local records note at least 3 deaths attributed to inhalation therapy in 1 year alone. Yet the practice persisted, cloaked in scholarly endorsement. Padinetavde. The peony and the purge healers exalted the peony as both a cure and a curse. Its petals, steeped in wine, offered mild sedation intended to quell bodily tumult. Women consumed goblets of peony wine before bed, expecting gentle slumber. Instead, they experienced violent catharsis, diarrhea, vomiting, and protracted fever, leading to weeks of convalescence. Midwives claim this purge expelled not only toxins, but impure desires, though parish almoners recorded numerous cases of anemia and debility. 19. The venomous belladonna, Bath. Belladonna's deadly reputation extended to erotic containment. Women sat in scalding baths infused with the root's extract, so that any slight arousal would trigger cramps and nausea, overshadowing any chance of pleasure. Noble women in France reported spending entire afternoons in these baths, emerging pale as ghosts. Some court physicians warned that prolonged exposure risked blurred vision and delirium, though others insisted the sacrifice was worth the promise of chastity. Irpadavda. Artistic depictions of the deadly clitoris. By the 15th century, manuscripts illustrated the female anatomy with lurid warnings. The clitoris was rendered as a rampant serpent coiled at the entrance of the vagina. Marginalia often depicted a knight battling the serpent with a lance, an allegory for the virtuous husband conquering his wife's worldly passions. These images fueled both medical fear and artisanal horror. Ivory carvings of the serpent clitoris adorned bedside altars as conduits of saintly intercession, begging divine aid in subduing female desire. Through these macabre tales, we glimpse a world that saw female pleasure not as a right, but as a pathology, a dangerous whim to be quelled by pain, poison, or supernatural terror. Women suffered bloodletting, torture, and spiritual condemnation, all in the name of keeping their wombs docile and their souls pure. Yet, beneath the cruelty lay an undeniable intrigue, a testament to the power of desire that even the harshest treatments could never fully extinguish. In Part 3, we'll reveal the most astonishing confessions from pleasure trial transcripts, explore succulent court records describing forbidden liaisons, and unmask the quack doctors who claim to have perfected the freeze-dried orgasm. We'll also trace how early feminists, hidden in convents or bold salons, began to challenge these absurd beliefs, sowing the seeds of modern sexual liberation. So, prepare for more anatomical absurdities, herbal horrors, and the irrepressible spark of female resilience. The medieval nightmare of female pleasure is far from over. The freeze-dried orgasm concoction. In the seedy underbelly of Toulouse's bustling apothecary quarter, an itinerant empiric named Dr. Gaston proclaimed he had isolated the very essence of female climax. His secret? A syrup distilled from dew collected on solstice roses, blended with powdered coral and ground beetle elytra. Women who dared swallow a thimbleful at midnight reported momentary surges of electric warmth, only to find themselves trapped in weeks of dull numbness. Gaston's clinic, a tent festooned with goat skulls, became notorious when a group of merchants' wives collapsed en masse, their husbands left mourning the curious void where ardor once bloomed. Pleasure trial, transcripts, the case of Sister Berenice. In 1423's ecclesiastical court docket, Sister Berenice stood accused of indecent rejoicing, after local children testified they heard her giggles drifting from the convent garden at dawn. The transcript details her examination. 3 priests held her wrists while the Mother Superior read passages from Job demanding confession. Berenice demurred, insisting only the Song of Skylarks lifted her spirits. The court, unconvinced, ordered an ordeal by scent. Her breath was tested against a bowl of consecrated rosewater. Finding traces of jasmine, a known aphrodisiac, they stripped her of habit and banished her to a remote hermitage, effectively sentencing her to lifelong solitude in exchange for her laughter. Quack doctors and their pleasure-suppressing paints. Across the Low Countries, traveling quacks sold vials of Ardennes Black, a lacquer said to seal a woman's genitals against temptation. Applied like shoe polish, it formed a glossy barrier that flaked off over days, taking with it any residual heat. Worse, Ardennes Black contained pitch, turpentine, and eel's blood, ingredients guaranteed to induce blistering and infection. Records from Bruges' Guild of Surgeons show at least a dozen women hospitalized each summer, their cries echoing through the infirmary corridors. Yet the paint remained popular among certain dowagers, who prized its promise of eternal serenity above any risk to their health. The Veil of Modesty, mechanical clamp. A craftsman tinkerer in parchment-bound Ghent patented a device resembling a small iron vise. Dubbed the Veil of Modesty, it clamped around the labia with adjustable screws. Noble women who employed it reported near instantaneous dropping of desire, mostly due to excruciating pain. The clamp came with a tiny key, entrusted only to the lady's confessor. Loose lips in the court of Burgundy joked that the true key to female virtue was a vault worthy of a cardinal's treasures. The veil's popularity declined only after an entire Khan's retinue fell ill following a shipment contaminated with foxglove residue. Forbidden liaisons in herbal. In 18, in Florentine salons, educated women circulated manuscripts on the art of chaste coitus, a manual detailing positions that minimize contact and maximize dryness. Yet clandestine footnotes in the margins, written in invisible ink, outlined how a drop of henbane oil on the fingertip could coax a maiden into a silent, trembling state that felt a world away from chastity. When the Medici discovered these marginalia, they ordered the burning of every copy of the treatise, consigning the secrets to hushed legend and dead-letter archives. Court records, the Duchess and the clitoral ring. In 1479, the Duchess of Savoy was implicated in a scandal involving a gold clitoral ring. Rumor held that her personal physician, an enigmatic Spaniard named Alonso de la Maza, fashioned a delicate hoop lined with tooth-like notches to stimulate the female vice. When a disgruntled chambermaid leaked the ring to court officials, the Duchess insisted it was merely a relic of Roman matrons. The tribunal disagreed. They ordered Alonso's tongue cut out for teaching unnatural arts, though the Duchess herself suffered only a week of house arrest, testimony to the power and peril of female sexual agency. The early feminist rebuttal, convent treatises of Sister Isolde. Hidden in the vaults of Sainte Genevieve Abbey lies Sister Isolde's manuscript on natural pleasure, penned circa 1501. Rejecting the humoral condemnation of female desire, she argued that pleasure signaled bodily harmony, an echo of divine creation. Sisters secretly copied her treatise onto scraps of parchment, exchanging it like contraband under candlelight. Though the abbey's prioress eventually discovered the texts and ordered them burned, whispers of Sister Isolde's arguments spread to secular circles, inspiring a handful of Italian courtiers to question the Church's monopoly on moral science. Subterranean pleasure clubs. Beneath the streets of medieval London, rumor held that an underground network called the Red Lily Society met in forgotten Roman tombs. Members, mostly noble women disguised in men's garments, explored their bodies with small ivory mirrors and imported Baltic amber cones. Guild records note that the society paid bribes to city watchmen in exchange for silent nods at locked hatches leading to the Thames's cryptic caverns. When King Richard III's agents finally raided one such gathering in 1483, they found women asleep on carved sarcophagi, faces serene, each clutching a sprig of vervain. Historians debate whether they were victims or pioneers of an early erotic fellowship. Silk thread clitoral ligatures. A physician in 16th century Constantinople developed a silk thread ligature, a fine filament tied around the clitoral shaft to dampen sensitivity through sustained pressure. Silk's translucence made detection difficult until a routine inspection for illicit piercings uncovered dozens of these ligatures in the harem of a minor pasha. Ottoman records credit the surprise discovery with a wave of reforms. Palace physicians were henceforth forbidden to administer any mechanical restraint on the body of a freeborn woman. The legacy of medieval myths. By the end of the Middle Ages, many of these absurd practices had faded, replaced by Renaissance curiosity and eventual medical enlightenment. Yet echoes remained. Early pamphlets on women's liberation referenced the wandering womb as a cautionary symbol, reminding readers how far medical science had advanced. Court physicians in the 17th century still warned of clitoral madness, borrowing directly from medieval manuals. And even today, anthropologists note that some rural folk in Europe retained rituals, like carrying vervain in their bodices, to ward off excessive feminine heat, an uncanny survival of pre-modern beliefs. Through these tales of clamps, clutches, and clandestine clubs, we witness a world terrified of female pleasure, yet powerless to extinguish it. Women experimented, quacks capitalized, and voices like Sister Isolde's dared to challenge the narrative with radical compassion. As the Enlightenment dawned, the triumph of reason began to dismantle these medieval horrors. But the flicker of desire, once so fiercely policed, continued to ignite hearts and fuel debates well into modernity. Part 4 will delve into the final revelations, the secret networks that smuggled Sister Isolde's manuscripts to Parisian salons, the first licensed midwives who defied church edicts, and the surprising survival of medieval erotic art in the private galleries of Renaissance patrons. We'll trace the journey from torture chambers to laboratories, from fear to freedom, and uncover how the strangest medieval beliefs about female pleasure helped shape our contemporary understanding of desire. Stay tuned for the grand finale, the midnight script, Smugglers. Hidden beneath the worn floorboards of St. Violette's convent lay a secret trove of Sister Isolde's fiery treatises. Illicit scribes, often laundresses or choir novices, risked excommunication to copy her words by candlelight. Each page was written in invisible ink made from lemon juice, revealed only when warmed over a brazier. These clandestine pleasure pamphlets slipped through noble households like contraband chocolate, passed hand to hand at masked balls. One Bolzano noblewoman, Countess Leonora, kept a stash woven into her mantilla. When her confessor unwrapped it, he found leaflets describing gentle pelvic massage and warm baths. Not blasphemy, she argued, but basic hygiene. The ensuing trial condemned both for sedition of the senses. Yet by the time the verdict arrived, dozens more nobles had already memorized entire chapters. The first licensed midwives' rebellion. In 1492, the French crown issued the first midwife licenses, ostensibly to regulate childbirth. Instead, midwives like Jeanne de Claret turned their royal charters into shields for women's autonomy. Jeanne's license granted her immunity from ecclesiastical arrest, allowing her to stock her apothecary with mandrake salves and clitoral stimulants. When local priests raided her herb garden, she brandished the king's seal, forcing them to retreat. Under her tutelage, apprentices learned manual techniques, a delicate blend of finger pressure and aromatic compresses that prioritized a woman's pleasure as part of healthy delivery. Her school's motto, Sapientia per voluptatem, wisdom through delight, became whispered legend in rural France, sparking a network of midwives who defied church edicts and championed the body's capacity for joy. The Painter's Secret Sketchbook. At the court of Alfonso the Magnanimous in Naples, painter Luca Fiorentino filled one of his sketchbooks not with saints or royal portraits, but with anatomical studies of women in states of arousal. These drawings, hidden beneath gilded covers, depicted muscle structures and nerve clusters around the clitoris, accompanied by marginal notes on triggers like feathers and herbal poultices. When the queen's physician discovered the tome, he demanded its destruction. Instead, Alfonso personally intervened, declaring that art should illuminate truths, however untidy. Fiorentino's sketches were guarded by court eunuchs, circulated only among the king's most trusted courtiers. Centuries later, these pages resurfaced in a Venetian library, shocking art historians with their technical precision and unapologetic celebration of female anatomy. The Venetian Pleasure Pharmacopoeia. In 1510, the College of Physicians in Venice issued a secret compendium, accessible only to doctors sworn to silence, detailing mixtures designed to awaken or restrain female desire. Recipes included saffron-infused oil applied to the inner thighs, honey and myrrh pastes rubbed along the labia, and distilled rose essence inhaled before coitus. The Pharmacopoeia also warned of toxic combinations, belladonna and opium, which induced deep stupor rather than gentle warmth. The book's preface, penned by a masked committee, justified these measures as balancing the humors of passion. Though never publicly acknowledged, copies of the compendium were smuggled into courts across Europe, offering both licit and illicit practitioners a toolkit for managing women's pleasure with surgical precision. The curious case of the mute courtesan. In 1523, Paris, a renowned courtesan named Margot le Silencieux, gained fame not only for her discretion, but for her claim that she could teach desire without a single word. Patrons reported spending entire nights in her sumptuous illuminated chamber, where Margot employed silent gestures, scented oils, and gentle instrumentation, a hollow reed or two to guide her clients toward mutual ecstasy. Word reached the Sorbonne, whose sorrows at her method spurred a theology student to publish a pamphlet accusing her of teaching demons to speak through the flesh. Margot responded by hosting public demonstrations, inviting prominent physicians to observe her nonverbal techniques. Though her reputation endured only a few seasons, her approach inspired whispered rumors of a silent art of lovemaking that valued touch above discourse. The alchemist's euphoric elixir. In the foothills of the Pyrenees, an alchemist named Soeur Lucien claimed to distill the quintessence of euphoria from a blend of crushed violets, ambergris, and distilled rainwater gathered on Midsummer's Eve. His elixir, a translucent violet tincture, was marketed as a tonic that liberates the soul's pent-up song. Patrons drank a draught before lovemaking, expecting waves of rapture. Some described visions of golden light and synesthetic melodies, while others suffered crippling headaches. The church branded Soeur Lucien a sorcerer, and his atelier was burned along with his laboratory notebooks. Yet fragments of his recipe survived in monastic pharmacopoeias, their efficacy debated by apothecaries for generations. The rogue anatomist and the wax mannequin. In 1538 Cologne, rogue anatomist Ilse von Haken commissioned a life-size wax mannequin, complete with a removable pelvis and silicone-like tissue grafts, to demonstrate the mechanics of female pleasure. She held clandestine seminars for midwives and noblewomen, guiding attendants' hands through calibrations of pressure and angle using the mannequin's realistic textures. Her lectures were recorded in coded shorthand, later deciphered by historians as the earliest sex education curriculum in Europe. Patrons dubbed her sessions prayerless hour for the absence of moralizing. Ilse insisted that understanding one's body was divine duty. Though condemned by the local bishop as blasphemy in wax, her mannequin inspired later anatomical models in medical schools, shifting attitudes toward empirical study of female physiology. The Scottish pleasure lock ritual. In the Highlands, clanswomen whispered of a nocturnal ceremony held by the mist-shrouded Loch Urlaid. On the first full moon of summer, chosen women bathed nude in the icy waters, circling 3 times while chanting an old Gaelic incantation, Fjord Hergna Sela, true red of union. The ritual supposedly awakened latent pleasure, harmonizing body and spirit. Skeptics blamed the clan's reputation for fertility on warm artisan lodges rather than frozen locks, but participants swore by the ritual's power, reporting heightened sensitivity that lasted through the harvest season. Parish priests attempted to suppress the lock gatherings, declaring them a diversion from Christian virtue, but the ceremonies continued covertly, passed from mother to daughter in whispered Gaelic rhymes. The secret archive of Madame de Pompadour. On the eve of her death in 1564, Madame de Pompadour bequeathed to her protégé a small leather portfolio filled with letters, recipes, and sketches detailing her personal investigations into female pleasure. These included elliptical diagrams showing optimal body angles, lists of favorite erotic fragrances, and elegiac poems celebrating the union of bodies. The portfolio was sealed and hidden within the walls of her Parisian Hotel Particulier, only to be discovered centuries later during renovations. The archive's contents, now housed in a private collection, reveal a woman who treated female desire as an art form, studying it with the same rigor as statecraft, and leaving a legacy of unapologetic sensuality that echoed through the salons of the Enlightenment, the dawn of reason and the end of torture. By the late 16th century, Renaissance humanism had begun to dismantle medieval absurdities. Physicians like Falloppio published treatises recognizing the clitoris as a distinct organ, not a monstrosity to be snipped or suppressed. Universities slowly introduced courses on gynecology that acknowledged female pleasure as part of holistic health. The invention of printed books allowed wider dissemination of accurate anatomical diagrams, challenging secret compendia and clandestine teachings. Though vestiges of superstition lingered, folk charms and whispered cures persisted in rural hamlets, the Age of Reason ushered in a new era, one where women's bodies became subjects of scientific inquiry rather than battlegrounds for moral panic, and thus concluded the long, strange voyage from demon wombs and vinegar bandages to enlightened understanding, a testament to humanity's capacity for both cruelties and compassion in the pursuit of pleasure.